Morning, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting of the City Council for May 15, 2012. May we have a roll call, please?
Council members: Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Weaver. Mayor Quintero. Mayor Pro Tem Manukian.
Here. Mayor Quintero will be delayed by a few minutes. In the meanwhile, we will start the meeting. Can we have the report, please?
The agenda for the May 15, 2012 special meeting of the City Council was posted on Thursday, May 10, 2012 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before you is Director of Administrative Services Finance regarding budget study session, fiscal year 2012-13, budget summaries for the following departments: Police, City Attorney, City Clerk, City Treasurer, Human Resources, Administrative Services, Information Services, and Management Services.
Thank you. Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, sir. We have this round 4 of our budget study sessions. We are going to take things a little bit out of order as we set up the AV system, so we can begin with City Attorney and then jump into the Police Department. I just want to advise Council and the folks watching that at the conclusion of the presentation, there are several items that Council has requested over the previous study sessions or questions that have arisen that we will address at the end. Namely, the application of the proposed CIP increases to fees as they pertain to development services, show you how that would impact hypothetical, not even hypothetical, really, actual cases, actual applications. We've just changed the names and the addresses to protect the innocent. So we'll have that discussion, also a discussion from Public Works regarding CIP and the reallocation of funds as those projects either are dormant or are not happening, and what we do with those monies for CIP, and then also a follow-up on the discussion yesterday about GYA that had arisen during the discussion on Parks and Community Services. So, that being said, we'll begin this morning with City Attorney's Office. I'm not the City Attorney, just playing one on TV for Mr. Garcia at the other end. But here you see our operation, $3.4 million on the dashboard. You can see, again, this notion of a high number of technical, professional, and supervisorial employees in this highly technical office, much different than what you would see in some of the line and field departments. In terms of strategic goals, we're looking at litigation, managing that litigation, trying to dispose of litigation as quickly as possible. Time is money for us, certainly, and then working actively with HR and finance through the risk management function to reduce the number of claims and losses year over year. In terms of indicators, we're looking at service requests that come through to the department as the cities, as the corporate counsel for the corporation known as City of Glendale, the number of lawsuits received and closed, and the average cost of those lawsuits first settled and tried.
The number of personnel that is reflected on this dashboard, does that include the individual attorneys that are being parceled out to other departments? Is this the total number of personnel, the 18.16?
Those folks that act as general counsel for the different departments, yes. Anybody that is a specialist we bring in on contract from the outside, no.
Right. So you have approximately 18 attorneys on staff?
No, that's the total, Councilman
Full-time.
Manukian, that's the total staff is 19.
Right, I'm sorry.
The .16 is the code enforcement attorney whose other time is paid directly from other funds.
Well, that's what I was asking.
There's 13 attorneys in-house,
Okay.
and the rest are support staff.
Well, that's what I was asking. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the .16. So there's a certain amount of time that is allocated to other departments.
Just for one attorney. If you recall, in prior years, we had more attorneys that were paid directly from other
Right.
departments' budgets. Now they're all folded into our budget, except for that percentage of the code enforcement attorney.
Okay. Thank you. Continue.
And moving on, then Bob will go through the financials once again.
Good morning. Very simply, the City Attorney's Office, we have the general fund only at 3.7 for last year and 3.4 for this year, with a reduction of $291,000. Broken down, majority of that is salary and benefits for the staff, very little M&O. As you can see, $318,000 for the year. And that's pretty much it for the City Attorney's Office.
So, going through the chart there, the roster, management supervisors are like what type of?
The managers and supervisors are the 4 general counsels in our office, and or 3, excuse me, and the it's back to 4, and the supervisor, the executive. We have an executive analyst who also supervises the support staff in our office.
Okay, and then the non-management are those our actual attorneys that are in?
No, non-management are the support staff, the secretarial support for the office, and the technical professional are the other attorneys in our office.
Okay, and how are we realizing that reduction of your budget of, what is it, it's down 400,000, 300,000?
The year-over-year reduction is mostly, we had 21 personnel in our office at the beginning of this fiscal year. All positions were filled. We now have 18 people. 2 of those positions that became vacant have been eliminated, and then the third one is part of the proposed reductions.
Okay. Not a lot, but several cases that come before us involve outsourcing the particular cases in general. Is that something that's, do you feel that we're at the right level of permanent staffing versus the outsourcing?
Councilman Najarian, with respect to, as our general philosophy with respect to sending cases out versus keeping them in, or if either it's a case of special expertise that we don't have in the office, and we've gotten a lot broader in our expertise, I'd say, or if it's such a case that has such a workload-intensive case that we just don't have the number of personnel to handle it, then we'll send it out. So I do feel it's the right mix. We can't handle a lot of the work in-house, both on the transactional side and the litigation, and we send those cases out that will either take up too much staff time or we don't have the expertise to handle it.
So where would the budget for the outsourcing of other law firms come from? Would it come from your budget, or would it come from general fund?
It depends. For litigation, it comes out of the liability fund.
Okay.
And if it's a special, if it's like redevelopment or formerly redevelopment or affordable housing, it'll come from those sources of funds.
Okay.
Part of their M&O through contract services. So again, it's a small operation, small but mighty. When we look at what those goals are, again, we're looking at achieving pre-trial dismissal of cases, reduced costs associated with litigation year over year, and then trying to find the best balance and more formally examining the risk management function that's spread over a couple different departments now. So we want to make sure that we aren't structured in a way that doesn't lend itself to us being as effective as possible, whether we consolidate risk management or keep it the way it is, finding ways to reduce claims and losses. And then lastly, something that we have to bring to the council, and we don't know how council will view it, but the notion of implementing an administrative citation process within the code enforcement function as a means of achieving compliance more quickly without having to go to litigation, because you have a citation that can be waived if the correction is adhered to or the correction is made, and then the fine, the citation goes away. It's waived. But it's something that it is a policy decision that has to come back before council.
We'll get into that at a later date.
Yes.
That would be something we would bring to you. And honestly, some cities have seen it as and inappropriately so, as a money maker. You issue fines because it generates revenue. If it's used appropriately, basically the amount of revenue goes down over a period of time, because what you want is compliance. If people comply, you don't collect the fine because they have indeed complied. And so it's really there as a way to expedite compliance. But it's something that, again, that is a policy decision that has to be made by the council. So what we're looking at, relatively minor cut, minor in terms of dollars, major in terms of functionality of the department. City Attorney's Office is going to be filling the pain as well as everybody else with respect to the staffing capacity. With respect to City Clerk, again, another relatively small department that's led by our elected City Clerk, Gary Kasakian. $1.4 million, 10 employees. This includes the inspectors and licensed people, as well as Artie and his management folks that are there. In terms of the goals that are coming online for the city clerk's office, we have the 2013 general municipal election, making sure that goes very smoothly and that we have all the outreach that is appropriate, as well as looking at the transition of permits and inspections from his office to the Department of Community Development, where we do much other permitting and inspection functions, to see if it works better to transition that function to that department. And looking at making sure that we have agendas that are in front of the council in a timely fashion, processing all of the agenda items that come before the Housing Authority, the successor agency of the city. In terms of key performance indicators, we're looking at the ratio between provisional ballots and folks actually voting at the polling place. More and more, we're seeing people vote by mail. It's important to understand that relationship. The number of public records requests that come in, how quickly he's able to turn them around, whether it's within the 10 days or we need that 14-day extension, and the number of permits that we get.
Misspelled.
What's misspelled?
It must be the city clerk's error.
Sure.
Extension. Yes. That's the New English. We won't make that correction. And then, of course, the filming activities that we have. A good year for filming. I think we can do still more, but of course, like anything else, too much of a good thing generates complaints with respect to disruption of commercial and residential neighborhoods. Bob?
Like the city attorney's office, city clerk's office is housed in the general fund with a relatively small budget relative to other departments. A slight increase from last year to this year. Breakdown, salaries and benefits comprise a large component of the city clerk's office of $922,000. M&O is $496,000 for the year. And again, the appropriations of $1.4 million within the general fund for the city clerk's office. Whoop.
There we go. And so again, you see the staffing distribution in that department. Again, this could change if we end up moving employees around, but that'll be something that is examined in the course of this coming fiscal year. With respect to those goals, again, we're looking at the first three I mentioned already. I'm sorry, I mentioned I didn't mention the second one, but essentially being the compliance officer for all state-mandated filings and FPPC forms, as well as a stretch goal, which will be somewhat difficult given the limited staffing, but to actually prepare and implement a formal records retention policy, something that we want and need. It's on the to-do list, and we want to see if we can't get that done this year. Moving to the city treasurer's function. Again, on the dashboard, $640,000 is the total budget with everything. It's 5 employees, 5 full-time employees. And with respect to strategic goals, the one thing that we have here for this operation is, as directed by City Council, revisiting the city's investment policy and determining if there is a reordering of the relationship between safety, liquidity, and yield in order to generate a greater return on investment. The KPI, as you see there, investment earnings per quarter by investment instrument, and measuring the accuracy of the daily cash balances that come in, as well as measuring the weighted average for maturity of all the different assets that we contain within the city's portfolio.
Again, another small general fund department, the city treasurer's office has a budget of about $640,000 in the general fund, comprised of $539,000 in salary and benefits, which is the majority of their budget, and a little bit of M&O of $101,000.
Oops, sorry.
Total appropriation of $640,000 in the general fund.
To say here's the staffing distribution reflective of Mr. Barucki and his team. Again, this is the goal that I had mentioned earlier, and the summary of this particular operation. Moving on to human resources, we get more into a larger, more complex operation with different funds. Dashboard shows you $44.6 million in total budget, 25.65 employees. And again, a higher number of managers, supervisorial, technical, professional people reflecting a lot of the casework that gets done through the department, and the analysts, the personnel analysts that are farmed out to the different departments to help guide those personnel decisions for the respective line departments. In terms of the strategic goals that we're looking at, building an in-house leadership program. If we are able to retain that leadership pipeline by way of retirement incentives versus layoffs, it's going to be important to cultivate the people that we have coming through our system on our farm team. So that'll be a program that they will achieve this coming year. Completing MOU negotiations with all of our bargaining groups. That's been an elusive goal in one particular instance, but it's something that is the strategic goal for this coming year. And then looking at our risk management and workers' compensation functions. Again, our goal here is to reduce costs year over year. On the KPI side, we're looking at the percentage of employee evaluations completed on time. We actually do a pretty good job of that right now. Number of employees, a number of days lost to work-related injury and IOD, cost per workers' comp claim, number of sick days used, number of employee grievances filed.
Is that something that can be controlled, the number of sick days used?
It can be managed. In my experience, I think Matt would tell you the same thing, through safety, wellness, and good management of sending folks home when they are sick so they don't get other people sick, making sure that people are trying to live as healthy a lifestyle as we can as an employer without interloping into their private lives.
Do we have control over the workers' comp claims
Again,
in terms of its costs?
In terms of its cost, not really.
The reason why I ask is because, there's that, I don't want to say rumors, but basically they are rumors that our workers' comp claims are through the roof. And there's a lot of false claims as well. I mean, those are the things that I hear in the community.
Yeah, I can't speak to false claims, certainly, but in terms of the number of workers' comp claims, the frequency of our workers' comp claims, a lot of that will come down to, again, good management. If you have somebody who is working far too much and they're putting themselves at risk of some kind of lower back strain or muscle strain, and they end up going out, that's something that a manager or supervisor can see. We can manage that element of the risk. Freak accidents, things that would be non-preventable, it's a cost of doing business. Do you have anything to...
Are we self-insured for the workers' comp?
Yes.
And do we have enough funds in that?
No.
Are we sufficiently funded for that?
We'll walk through that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, go.
Matt, since you weren't on air, could you repeat what you said about, just for the viewing audience at home, about workers' comp and the relation to the state and sort of what we can and can't do?
Members of council, as I was saying, the workers' comp system is mandated by the state. Whenever there is any type of injury in the workplace that is determined to be work-related, we are obligated to provide medical care and appropriate time off for recovery.
As is any other employer for that. So we're not unique, right?
No.
We're required by state.
There are things we can do to try and control those costs through good safety practices, through good managerial practices, but by and large, a lot of it is out of our control. And the system itself, under the statute, it is somewhat in the employee's favor. The statute is to be liberally construed, as it's put. So, in a lot of cases, we do see some of these minor injuries evolve into far more expensive things than we had anticipated. So.
And part of the reason why this is one of their strategic goals is that if we end up with fewer people, but the stated endeavor of the organization is to try to maintain service levels as best we can, fewer people doing more work, it's going to be incumbent on the managers and supervisors to make sure that the folks that they have aren't working at risk of injuring themselves, thus going out. And so we are going to have to be quite a bit more focused on this particular area.
Yeah.
Bob?
Okay, human resources is obviously in the general fund, but has a lot of special funds attached to the different benefits, and we'll walk through all those. Within the 12-13 fiscal year, the general fund budget for HR is $2.5 million, down about $138,000 from the previous year. unemployment insurance, where we fund the claims that we have coming in the house for unemployment, is funded through this fund. We charge.
Are we self-insured as well for the unemployment?
No, we're not self-insured, but it goes through the state. But unlike a private sector employer that pays a premium to the state, we self-fund an amount, and then when somebody files, we then pay those claims. It's a little bit different arrangement for government employees.
How is that different than being self-insured?
Well, we just don't send the money into as a percent of payroll. We keep it until the claims are filed, so it's a benefit to us. If there's no unemployment claims at all, we don't necessarily.
It accumulates?
It just accumulates, or we stop the charge, which we had done for several years. But it's a very small, it's a 0.2% of the base pay is what we fund that.
Okay. Which is
fund
probably
with.
much less than
Yes.
what we would have been charged
By the state.
by the state,
Correct.
which is around 3 to 6% probably.
Bear in mind, if this fund would probably get utilized if we have layoffs, people will likely file for unemployment, so that those numbers may go up. Workers' compensation, we talked about that. We've upped the budget this year to $11 million. That's funded through charges to all the various departments, ranging anywhere from 2.4% to 24.9%, depending on the work comp class code that type of employee falls into.
Would we save money if we insured with an outside insurance company for workers' comp?
You know, that question's been asked, and I don't know.
Something that we should look into?
We have looked at it. I think
Because you said we're underfunded on the insurance, on the workers' comp insurance fund.
in our own fund, yes.
Okay. And by how much are we underfunded?
Right now, we have a deficit of about $19 million as of last year. I think we're making some headway. I'll walk you through that in a few minutes. But we've gone through a complete restructuring of our rate and how we charge the rates, and it's now based on experience by class code, much like a state comp operation would do. So we're kind of in line. We have the same class codes as the state would have for our various.
And the rates are comparable?
Rates are based off the experience of claims within our own operation. They may not be comparable to.
They're not comparable to the state's averages?
They're comparable in that we have our police, for example, in a class code. The rates may be completely different based off the size of the pool that we would compare to versus the experience in claims.
I would like at some point to see what,
Makes sense to jump in.
to look at outside insurance companies if we can draw some comparisons and find out if there's ways of saving money.
Going through the dental insurance, again, it's a fund we set up. We charge a percent of payroll through all the different departments. It's anywhere from 0.64 to 0.96% that fund this fund, and then we pay the dental claims premiums out of there. Same thing with medical. Medical is anywhere between 9.3 and 13% of pay gets funded into this.
Just for the record, please make note that the mayor is here and I will hand the meeting.
I had no idea you were the mayor pro tem.
If you were, you'd be here earlier.
Wonder things are moving along quickly.
Moving on from medical insurance, vision insurance, same type of thing. It's a very small percent of payroll to pay for that benefit. We fund these funds and then pay the expenses from those. Employee Benefits Fund, this is a fund that we charge a percent of payroll like all the other benefit funds. This pays for all the vacation and accrued comp leave as employees take it throughout the year.
Comp leave, meaning, what does comp leave entail exactly?
Vacation, and if somebody works overtime, but they take, in lieu of overtime, they'll take leave. RHSP, that's the Benefit Retiree Savings Health Plan. We fund when somebody retires or there's a percent. I think the GPOA has a percent. It goes through this fund, and we pay the benefits out of this fund. And again,
does that come out of city funds, or is it?
Yes.
Or is it funded by the employees?
comes from the city.
So that is our portion of the RHSP.
That is our portion of the RHSP, correct.
And
Post-employment.
RHSP is a negotiated benefit to the employees?
Correct.
And which employee groups have that?
I believe everybody.
All of them? Have we tied? Okay.
So just further on the RHSP, it's when somebody retires, the value of their sick leave is converted in a fixed dollar per hour amount, depending on the bargaining group, and is deposited in an account for the use of the employee for their to pay their post-retirement medical. The last fund, the Post-Employment Benefits Fund, that is kind of a legacy fund to pay for the old retiree health plan from long ago. The city had a retiree health plan, so we fund that to pay for those premiums for older retirees that still utilize that plan. I think we're down to around 60 participants, something like that.
How many?
About 60 left in that plan. It also is used for any employee that's deceased on the job. Their beneficiaries get medical payments, and we fund it through that as well. So going through the salary and benefits, the majority of those are in the general fund. Workers' compensation does have a staff handling the claims in HR, and that's approximately $1.1 million. The remainder of these funds don't have staff. Obviously, the benefits we've put into the benefit category is that we pay those through those funds. And that's the last fund. M&O General Fund, HR has $976,000 in the general fund. In the unemployment is $341,000. That's primarily the payments to the state when we get the invoices from them. Workers' compensation, that's the claims that we pay, 9.9, approximately $10 million out of the comp fund.
Again, how much are we underfunded on this fund?
I'll go through. Dental insurance, about $1.5 million. Medical insurance, the budget for next year is $23 million for the various coverages that we have throughout the city. Vision's about $271,000. The employee benefit fund is $65. In costs, RHSP is about $53. And the post-employment does not have any M&O transfers or capital. So again, the $2.5 million is the appropriation in the general fund for HR. As we walk through the different internal service funds, you can see the amount of the revenues we have against the appropriations, estimated fund balance of about $455 in the unemployment insurance, give or take, depending on the claim. So we still have a little bit of a fund balance. Workers' compensation, we're guesstimating $15.4 million in revenues for this year against presumed claims of $11 million. We'll generate hopefully a surplus of about $4.4 against what we're estimating our fund balance to be about a negative $15 million at the beginning of this year, ending 12/13 at about $11 million deficit still. If you recall, we had that 5-year program to continuously raise our rates to ourselves to help amortize that deficit over a 5-year period. So this is year 2.
Question. If I may, Mr. Mayor. Does the composition insurance fund the amount of revenues that are generated, does that come from our general fund?
Comes from all the different funds.
All the different funds.
Any fund that has an employee pays into that fund.
Okay.
The majority of which is the general fund.
The question is thus: if we are having a huge amount of deficit in our general fund, why not delay the amortization of some of these funds so that we can allocate the funds to the general fund and not have layoffs, basically?
We could do that.
Or kind of delay or stagger the retirement, the voluntary retirement over the next couple of years, as opposed to doing doing a hatchet job on the employees this year. Can we, if we're going to have a net surplus of $4 million, why don't we have a net surplus of $1 million and allocate the $3 million to the general fund?
We could do that.
Certainly we could. Once we understand what the final impacts or anticipated final impacts are, would be as part of this budget to come to you to say, instead of 15.4, if we adjust compensation fund and liability fund, we can make that 14.4 or 13.4.
Because both these numbers are estimates, basically.
They are
both the
estimates.
$15 million and the $11 million, we could end up having a $5 million charge against our appropriations.
That's very true, but if you recall, several years ago,
No, I don't. I wasn't here.
Well, let me remind you. Several years ago, when these funds kept accruing larger and larger deficits,
I understand.
The external auditors wrote a comment in their management letter saying, you really need to deal with this. The first proposal was that we would deal with it over a 3-year timeline. We've then since pushed it out to 5 years. Can we delay it? Absolutely. I understand the difficulty in the fiscal times. However, the risk in delaying this is we dig a deeper hole, which will have to then further raise rates in future years.
Well, I'm not proposing that we dig a deeper hole. I'm just proposing to fill it up a little less than what you're proposing in this budget.
I understand.
These numbers are that 5-year.
That's correct. Understand, and just so you know, the trends for workers' comp are on a very rather steep increase in terms of cost of claims based off the actuarial studies on our experience. So we could flatline the revenue going into there, but as claims and claims expenses,
I'm not proposing to flatline it. I'm just saying lower.
We lower it down, then we could do that. Dental insurance, not a lot going on there. We try and charge what the amount is with a little premium to keep some balance in there depending on any changes in that program. Medical insurance, again, revenues at $26 million, appropriation at $23.8. There's a little bit of a surplus in there.
And my comments are kind of true to the rest of these funds as well. We can trim some of these and generate some revenues to the general fund, or not generate revenues, but decrease
Savings.
Right, decrease the expenditures.
And as Bob indicates, certainly we can, and we will give you all of, again, those trade-offs at the end. To be able to say, do we want to make a 5-year plan, a 7-year plan, understanding that if we continue to kick the can down the road, that's what we're doing. We're kicking that can down the road, as opposed to trying to
But
settle
again,
the books.
I don't want to be I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying kick the can down the road. I'm just saying, but just minimize it and don't
Understood.
Don't make it so much.
Continuing on with vision, again, appropriations against the revenue, it's pretty static in that fund. Same thing with the 640 and 641, the employee benefits and the RHSP benefits.
Because let me say, these deficits were not generated over a few years. They were generated over many, many years.
Yes, they were.
So
That was a comment I was going to make, that this is a situation that's been around for an awfully
Right.
long time. I understand the audit or auditors pointed that out, and what is a consequence, by the way? They made these suggestions and pointed out how inconsistent.
I think it just goes to good kind of the report card of the city in terms of fiscal policy and fiscal management. It shows the fiduciary responsibilities are taken seriously. The fact that we have a plan, I think, is good. If we push the plan out from 5 to 7 years, I think that would still be acceptable, and we can certainly do that.
Does it reflect personally on you?
I hope not.
Only in the eyes of the council. There you go.
The last fund, again, is the post-employment benefits fund, minimal amounts going through that fund.
So as you see here, the 25 and two-thirds employees really does not speak to the number of, or the amount of money that gets pumped through this department for insurance functions and the liability functions. But it is it kind of is what it is in terms of the full service in-house services that we have through our HR department. As I mentioned earlier, refining our in-house leadership development assessment programs, the MOUs with everybody, implementing ways to slow that liability and workers' comp curve. One of the things we also want to do this year, we will do this year, is an employee satisfaction survey. Coming out of the period of uncertainty and tumult that we've had, we want to know how our employees feel, what can we do with them, for them, to make sure that they stay focused, motivated, and ready to bring their best level of service each day to work. 2 stretch goals for this department would be a white paper assessing our compensation structure, and a white paper looking at modifications to the city's civil service rules and procedures. The compensation structure is a function of the way that cities in general pay their employees, compensate their employees based on in the civil service system as well, in ways that really have not changed very much in the last 150 years, while everything else in this world has changed over the last 150 years. So not professing that we will suddenly find the cure for the common cold, but I think we need to be able to look in these directions to see, what are we doing, what are leading edge organizations doing, how can we emulate those best practices. So again, more stretch goals considering the staffing issues that we're facing, but goals nonetheless. And we are looking at this point, again, strictly at this point, $262,000 in reductions. At this point, perhaps we can go back to police, or do we want to just power through? We'll just keep on going. We'll do police last. So we will bring you up with administrative services, dashboard, $13.3 million, 40.7 employees. One of the things that they will be charged with this year is
Basically, administrative services is the finance department.
finance, yes. Developing an online reporting system, basically something that will be online for council, for all the different departments to be able to access a dashboard much like this that shows vital management information for them in real time, as updated as frequently as possible.
What was that again?
Basically, a dashboard similar to this that would be updated on regular intervals, that would be available to
For all the departments?
for departments and council to be able to track what overtime is, again, in real time on a
And how will they access it? Through the intra?
web-based.
The way the dashboard modules work basically is when you log in, it pops up almost like if you have a web page, and you can,
Like a company summary?
yeah, you can configure it to have whatever key information that an individual wants to see.
That's great. It's about time. I've been talking about this for 10 years now.
They are available. They're my recollection, looking at them in the past, they're fairly expensive, but we're certainly going to look at that.
Oh, we have to purchase additional modules to make that a
We
reality?
can either do it that way or come up with something in-house. I mean, it depends on what the cost is to go outside.
Doesn't PeopleSoft have something that, because QuickBooks does, and it's only,
Ed can speak to it.
$300.
Sure.
PeopleSoft is $3 million, so I would think that they have something, similar.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Ed Frega, Information Services Director. We have already acquired the tools. They are related to the PeopleSoft. They were $76,000.
Only.
And that's what we're looking at as the tool
Okay.
to do this.
Very good.
We'll also be I'm sorry, Ed. Looking at an ECB pilot program. We'll pick a department in the general fund to experiment with this. This basically is a budgeting tool whereby departmental savings that are realized at the end of the year are split between going back to fund balance and allowing a department to keep that portion of their savings that accrues to their good management. They can use that for approved types of functions that don't make their way into the budget. So things that relate to new equipment, new capital, special projects, contract services, things that are not reoccurring because it would be one-time money. And then we'll also be looking at, very importantly, looking at refinancing, renegotiating, rebidding contracts, indentures, remittances. If we have bonds that can be refunded, not refunded, but refinanced, save money, that'll be something that the department is charged with. We already have a few different quotes on those efforts. The KPI, really, it's a mix of things for the actual department itself, as well as citywide indicators. But the things that apply to the admin services department, the collections cost efficiency, the amount of money we spend on collections versus the amount of money we get back, the accuracy of financial transactions, the amount of time it takes to process those transactions through the system, and then for all of our internal service functions, you'll see an indicator that compares a ratio for their size of their department against the overall citywide department. So we have an idea about what the value is, what the relationship is between internal services, administrative services in this case.
You mentioned refinancing the bonds. Where are those COPs that were done for the airport? Are they fairly competitive, or what?
For the police building?
For the airport, for the police building.
They are, and we have looked at refinancing those. The interest rate on those is 0.23. Now it's reset every week. It hasn't been over 0.25% for probably 2.5 years. So it's still very, very competitive to keep those in place. We actually looked at refunding those and doing some different transactions, but it just is not cost effective at this point. Moving along to our fund summaries, in finance or administrative services, we have most of our individuals in the general fund. We do have the liability insurance fund, total budget of about $11.5 million last year.
Can you explain the liability insurance fund?
Liability insurance is basically where we charge a rate to all the user departments throughout the city to fund both the purchase of insurance and any claims that we pay from the outside. Somebody has a trip and fall, that fund funds those payments, in addition to hiring outside counsel and any litigations that we may have, all flows through that fund. So the budget combined is $13.3 million for this year, with increases both in liability and in the general fund. And the general fund primarily is a restructuring with the GWP finance staff all migrating down to the finance department and becoming part of the general fund. It's 5 individuals, which comprise the majority of that $879,000.
So 5 individuals were being budgeted out of GWP. Now they're back where they're supposed to be.
They're back into general fund 101, and they'll be cost allocated back to the utility for support services.
Right.
So breakdown in salary and benefits is $3.9 million in the general fund, and just a tick over $400,000. There's only 3 individuals in the liability fund that manage all our insurance operations for the entire city. General fund M&O covers costs of the audit and so on and so forth that we pay out. Within the liability fund, obviously a very large M&O of 7.3 that pays the claims and buys the insurance in that fund. Again, the 5.5 in appropriations in the general fund for the finance department, accounting operations budget, and so on. Within the liability fund, the majority of that revenue, or all that revenue, is charges to the user departments against the appropriations that we have to pay for the insurance. As we've budgeted, there's a slight surplus coming in for next year. That's assuming we don't have any large claims come in for next year. We still have projected almost negative $4 million in fund balance, making a little bit of headway by the end of 12/13. If you recall, 2 years ago, I believe, the council took action to transfer into this fund about $9 million to bolster up the finances. There was a rather large deficit at the time, so we improved it. We almost got it back to zero, but we've been slipping back a little bit since then.
Are these contributions by the different departments rated in relationship to the claims against those departments, or is it based on just number of employees? How do we do that?
Right now, it's a percent. It's basically 3.45% of payroll that we charge out to all. And we have looked at doing that. We could do any one of a number of different ways, by department, by fund. It became rather distorted in terms of doing it that way, so we just left it at a flat rate because we're all in basically the same risk pool within the city. I can tell you, if we did do it by fund, it would put a lot more cost back to the general fund.
Say that again, if we did it by...
If we
cost?
separate it out based off claims experience, the majority of the claims are attributable to the general fund, primarily the police department. So there would be a lot more cost coming back to the general fund as opposed to spreading it.
Well, I mean, but in that subcategory, doesn't that come out of the police department budget anyway, their contribution to the...
Their contribution does, but it's a flat amount throughout the entire city. We use it as we look at the entire city as a complete pool versus individual departments or funds.
I mean, to the extent that this liability, that our liabilities start to get out of control, I'm wondering, is that a best practice to try and... In other words, if you run a department and you're getting a lot of claims against you, liability claims, for whatever reason, somehow presumably related to the management of the department and the employees, shouldn't you feel that little pinch out of your budget as you go forward, rather than have libraries, let's say, that are, I don't know what the claims are for libraries. I don't think there are many.
Relatively small.
Versus other departments?
One of the goals that you'll see in the management services function is to implement the proposed department accountability policy. That basically does what you're talking about. There is an inherent cost of doing business with respect to police, fire, public works, and GWP that will generate claims. Police, when they arrest somebody, invariably there is a number of folks day in, day out that are going to file a claim. There's a cost of doing business for that. There are also situations whereby there's a breakdown in supervision or there's a breakdown in management that goes back to that notion of management should be responsible in some way, shape, or form for that cost. The policy that we are drafting and circulating to departments that we'll bring to council basically determines that maintains that if it is determined that a departmental management breakdown is responsible for a liability, for a cost, that charge comes back to the department in question. That means maybe you don't buy vehicles this year. That means the department, you don't fill vacancies this year.
We do incorporate that policy at this point, or that's something we will?
No.
It is on the list to do this year, to be done this year.
Because I think that's a good idea. Eventually, some claims can't be foreseen or avoided, but to the extent that some can be, I'm all about responsibility at the personal level and at the departmental level as well. So I would look forward to a discussion on that as it gets...
We have the data, and we have actually run numbers to do that very thing. The decision at this point was to just keep it at a flat rate throughout the entire city, but it certainly can be done.
There probably, if we were to go and do it to reallocate these funds on a departmental basis, then I think in fairness and equity to those several departments that generate the bulk of the claims would be to allocate money to them from the general fund, say, here is your risk allocation, and then they pay that back into the liability fund. And if you go above that amount for some reason, well, that comes back to you. But if they have a line item of $1 million to suddenly saddle them with $4 million in premium or in liability cost, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I hear what you're saying, and I think we can incorporate that over time.
And let's wrap the workers' compensation in there as well. I mean, a lot of that, I think, can be affected by proper management and focus on safety throughout. So to the extent that a department manager can come in and say, look, we've had very few workers' comp claims, less than were expected, there should be some sort of incentive to the department and to quite frankly, to the employees if that's something that...
Well, I think you take that thinking in conjunction with an ECB budgeting program, so that we have this amount. We didn't use that amount because of the good work, the careful work, the good safety consciousness of the different employees. Thus, the department gets to keep a portion of that unspent money that was realized. As call it profit, call it whatever you want. They just didn't spend it. That was allocated to them. Now they can use that on any number of approved things for the benefit of those employees. There's a carrot and a stick there.
In terms of the workers' comp, we do, as I noted earlier, we have that broken down by various worker class codes to comply and be consistent with the state. It does break that down into the experience based off the workers in that class code. It's not 100% pure to that individual department, but for example, the class codes that we have is employees in waterworks, which would pertain to obviously the water fund, electric, light and power, sanitation, firefighters, police, clerical, garbage and refuse, municipal, state, all other employees. So we divide through our payroll system those various class codes, and then the claims are then put into those different categories, and then the experience and the rates are based off the claims paid in those categories. So in a sense, the police are isolated based off their class code for workers' comp. So they're paying their commensurate rate to the fund. So in that respect, we have that already within the comp fund.
So again, you look at admin services, similar to human resources. This area here reflective of the very technical, professional nature of the department. And when you look at those goals, as I had mentioned, the most interesting couple of ideas here is going to be, well, actually all of them are very interesting, but to the extent that we were able to come up with a new way of budgeting that gives that carrot and stick with some of the new costs that we're allocating out to departments. And if we can actually hit this target of 2.5% cost reduction if we're able to refinance some existing debt, and primarily we're talking about GWP debt, but also we'll take another look at the COPs to see when it does make sense, if it does make sense. Stretch goal would be just targeting and adhering to a percentage of accuracy on the 5-year financial forecast. So to the extent that Bob and his team are going through and advising council as to what we can count on conservatively, but practically and realistically, what we can count on in terms of upcoming revenues, upcoming expenses. It helps you in the policy making and budgeting for the coming years. We do have some proposed reductions here, and we'll summarize all of these at the end. Up next is information services. We're talking about an $18 million budget, a little over 67 employees. We have a new website that is coming online that we're very excited about. That'll be a goal for them in the coming year. Security is the watchword of this coming fiscal year, and improving our security of our IT assets. And then looking at our radio system and maintaining a very high standard along with police and fire. IS department is very much integrated into that department, or to that effort. Key performance indicators, pretty self-explanatory stuff. PCs per support staff, radios per support staff, number of PCs, pre-C work orders completed. Their department actually lends themselves quite a bit to customer satisfaction, again, as an internal service department. With respect to their budget, Bob will take you through the funds.
Information services is divided up into 3 very distinct operations: the applications fund, the infrastructure fund, and the wireless fund. Applications, as it's named, is all the software and such that we buy throughout the city, and the folks to manage that software. The infrastructure is all the hardware, servers, wiring, various systems that we have throughout the year. The budget for those 3 funds: $7.7 million for applications, $6.6 for infrastructure, and $3.6 for wireless, for a total of about $18 million. Broken out in salary and benefits, you can see within the applications is about $3.5 million. Infrastructure is $2.5 million, and the wireless is about $1.2 million, for total salary and benefits of about $7.2 million. Within the applications fund, their M&O transfers and capital are almost $4.2 million. That, by and large, is to pay for the various software, ongoing license fees, and folks within that fund to manage those resources. Same thing with infrastructure. That includes the budgeting for all the new equipment and various hardware systems that we have, along with the folks to take care of those PC specialists and so on and so forth. Wireless, again, the whole, all the radios throughout the city and phone systems are wireless phone systems. The radio backbone, all those items are included in there, roughly about $2.5 million.
Question regarding applications. When I was first elected, I proposed looking at Google Docs and all of that, and I understand that the city of La Cañada has switched to Google-based applications. Did we look at that, or can we look at that as well, considering how much money we're spending on applications? And we're not given the details here in terms of what applications. I'm sure there's more than the Microsoft Office suites, but have we looked at that to see if we can implement it as well and generate any savings?
Councilman Manukian, we have preliminarily looked at it. We looked at some of the things that were done in the city of Los Angeles, but we can certainly go back and take another look at it.
Where that city of La Cañada has switched to Google?
I'm not aware of La Cañada per se.
What is that, Rafi? What is that?
They charge per user $50 fee for all these applications, including spreadsheets, documents, and
Yeah.
and mostly that is what is used anyways, and the email system. And for 1,800 employees at $50, it's approximately $90,000. So
There has
I don't
been
know what
there has been some research on that. Gartner has done some articles on that. What you find is that the Google applications are pretty preliminary. They're not capable of doing some of the more advanced functions that we do routinely. So for some people, it would work. However, then you get into a mixed environment where you've got some of the more sophisticated software and some of the less sophisticated software and the management of both of those. And then you introduce the whole question of training. It's taken a decade for the employees to learn the current system. So
I don't think so with some of the applications that we use. I've used them. I've looked at them. Spreadsheets are pretty much spreadsheets. The formulas and the things could be a little different, but I don't think there would be that much training. And the docs are certainly very similar, and you can save them in a doc format or a docx format.
you can. That's true. You can
And
save them in
it's-
both formats.
Yeah, and you can use them through both platforms.
Well, we'll take a further look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to the fund recap for the three internal service funds. The various revenues that we charge for the $16.6 million spread through the three different funds. That's to give a little highlight on the process. These are the first items we look at in the budget process. This is the starting point of the budget that we do, starting back before the first of the year to start getting the numbers and projections and replacements and verifying counts and so forth, or I should say not we, but Ed and his staff. Once this whole financial picture is put together, that's the first step in the budget process, and then rolls into what the citywide cost allocation plan is.
Are the revenues mostly the internal service fund charges that are being charged against the other departments?
Correct.
And there is no amount being allocated from general fund revenues to the IS department? Is that correct?
These are charges that go out to all the user departments. A big chunk of this comes to the general fund,
Based on the departments.
based on the users.
Okay.
So, for example, finance gets a large chunk because we have a lot of PeopleSoft users and a lot of general fund.
My question is more from the other side of the equation. Are there any funds, as you have general fund, you have the total revenues for general fund, and each department has a certain amount of that allocated to each department. Is IS allocated a certain percentage of the revenues? Or is it all from internal service funds?
I think I can answer
interfund.
that.
It's
Yeah.
all internal service funds.
So their charges are just M&O expenses to the general fund departments.
Okay.
So on the fund recap, we have the various revenues that are charged, the $16.6 million against the appropriations for those expenses, and then the asset capitalization, or all the items of capital nature assets that they purchase throughout the year. We have to adjust that because they become assets. So the projected fund balance at the end of 12/13 is 3.5 for applications, 2.3 for infrastructure, and about 850,000 for wireless.
Are there, for internal service, are there, for their own internal allocations, are there allocations for their own, maintaining their own equipment and all of that? Do they, is there a certain amount that they cost the general fund?
Their costs are all embedded in this fund, and then it's rolled into, we don't
What
turn
about
around and
maintaining their own computers? Do they charge that out to the other departments as well? Are they?
Well, it's a cost for them providing IS services for everybody, so that cost is embedded in all this.
No, let's
We
say
actually-
Mr. Ed Frega has a computer.
Yeah.
What is that charged to? Which department?
We have internal charges,
Okay, well, that's the question.
yes.
So you have
We
your
charge
own departmental
ourselves.
charges that you use for maintaining your own department, basically.
Well, we charge ourselves within...
It's identified in their total budget.
Okay, all right. So not everything is charged to all other departments. There is a certain amount that, for their own department, that is maintained as well.
No. How do I explain this? There's costs within IS that are for the operation of IS. Obviously, they use up, but that's a cost that is then as an overhead rolled out as part of the costs that are charged out to all the other funds. So all the other funds pay for that service of them providing, their individuals, their expertise, plus all the hardware and software that they do. So it's part of the overhead that's embedded. But there are costs within IS for them to operate, obviously. We, however, in turn charge them for workers' comp and insurance and all that kind of stuff. That gets embedded in their cost, too. It's a circular.
Yeah, I know. I don't agree with charging all of the costs of the department to the other departments, but
that's the nature of an internal service fund. They have to be
no,
self-supporting.
I know, but it's not the nature of IS, though. I mean, IS has its own internal operations that they need to maintain as well.
Well, that's no different than the insurance fund. There are internal costs for that, but those are all embedded as part of the salary and benefits, and then that part of the charge out to the other departments.
Right, but you're comparing apples and oranges. Insurance funds are not comparable to an IS department that has personnel and is maintaining its own equipment.
Well, there are personnel. For example, workers' comp. There's a large component of staff that handle the claims. Those are identified on top of all the claims payments as part of the cost of providing the workers' compensation for the entire city, and those costs are then spread throughout to all the different user departments.
Right.
Similar methodology, different items.
I
and costs.
understand your approach. I don't agree with it 100%, maybe 80% I agree with it. But I think some of the IS has to be, some of the costs, for some of the costs of maintaining an IS department should be appropriated to the IS department itself as opposed to the whole thing being appropriated to the other funds. So, but that's a disagreement. We can continue, yeah.
The only goal here that I didn't mention previously is this one that kind of goes maybe tangentially to what Mr. Manukian had asked with respect to looking at online offerings. This speaks more to the issue of service to other departments. We talked about this in CDD pursuant to budget limitations, being able to integrate multi-departmental types of e-services, and in the case of CDD, online permitting, e-permitting, that would cross over to Fire, Public Works, as well as CDD. It's just a function of money at this point to allocate those dollars.
That whole thing kind of went over my head. Could you repeat that?
As a stretch goal for this department, if there is money available to procure the software necessary to put forward an online service to all the other departments, in this case, the example is CDD, Fire, Public Works, so that we can accept plans online and do online plan checking for folks.
Okay, all right.
It's just a function of having the money to do that.
How much money?
Last estimate was, I believe, $400,000 to $450,000. We do show reductions here because it's an internal service department. We're able to put additional pressure on this particular budget. But the investment in technology is something that you see as part of that $15.4 million general fund gap. Well, maybe not last, because we have police department after this, but here's management services and internal audit, 5.3.
We need to cut this by half.
Just make sure it's the right half.
They did when they cut our salaries.
We have, between all the folks at GTV6, internal audit, management services, certainly, we're looking at 33.68 people. And when you have, in terms of strategic goals, the audit assessment, with internal audit, they do a 12-month work plan. Right now, we're looking to do a 24-month work plan that reflects the changes in the organization coming down the pike this year and next. As I said yesterday, we're evaluating the changes based on the cuts that we make in 12-13. 13-14 will be a year of evaluation. We also hope to intend to do a citizen satisfaction survey, bringing in an outside third-party outfit. Maybe it's the Rose Institute, maybe it's the Public Policy School at Long Beach State, but to come in and do a very exhaustive citizen satisfaction survey of our community.
Why the 24-month audit schedule? Isn't that kind of long in terms of scheduling audits?
Right. If it is longer. We usually do a 12-month audit schedule for everybody. But to the extent that we're measuring pre- and post effects of how we will reshape these departments, and the fact that the departments won't be completely remade until well into the coming fiscal year, we want to make sure that we identify when CDD will be audited for operational effectiveness. That might not happen in 12-13. That might have to happen in 13-14, just by the sheer nature of them getting the department into its final form, such as it is. That's really all a function of that. And then working with human resources, as I mentioned on their slide, one of the things they'll be looking at is refining our offerings in personnel development. A key component will be the exceptional customer service program and leadership assessment. Key performance indicators, looking at the percentage of audit closeout items, so that we do audits, and then what happens then. We actually need the departments to implement the audit findings. That's something that we definitely need to focus on. It'll be an indicator of how well we're doing in this arena. Resident requests process, legislative items tracked, and our citizen satisfaction rating once that survey is completed.
I was
Yes, sir.
There was a story in the news the other day about the council member from West Hollywood who had charged, some felt an excessive amount.
100,000, I heard.
To the city for lunches. It was 7,000 in lunches. And then they said, well, his salary was only about 14 or 15,000, I guess, based on the population. And I started feeling very sorry for him. I wondered how, and I think he had a day job too. Maybe he was an attorney or something like that. Started feeling very sorry for him and wondered how he could ever keep up with the resident requests and all that. And further on in the story, they indicated he has a dedicated, each member of the West Hollywood City Council has a dedicated staff member who has paid a salary of $100,000. That's how they keep up with all that stuff. So we don't have staff. We don't have staff. And obviously, back in the news, we were joking about Kim Kardashian and all that, and I made the offer to make her my honorary chief of staff. A lot of people misunderstood and felt that I actually did have a chief of staff, and I don't. I don't even have a staff. So, and neither do any of my colleagues. And we rely oftentimes on the few non-management folks in the city manager's office to help us on issues. And I'll be honest, I think a lot of times they are overextended. I think a lot of times their duties of confidentiality are strained. To whom is a administrative assistant? I don't know what the job classification is. to be beholden to. If a city council member says, this is what I'm doing, please don't tell management, or please don't tell my colleague, Mr. Manukian. What sort of conflict does that put them under? So I think as this city grows, and I think it's growing, I don't buy that 192 population. As the city grows and the demands on council are nonstop, I mean, these BlackBerries, let me tell you folks, the days of, I was going to pick out a mayor from the board, Carol Parcher are long past, where he would maybe get a few letters in the mail. They didn't even have telephone answering machines back then. My BlackBerry, as well as my colleagues' BlackBerries, are ringing nonstop with everything from a barking dog to permit problems to event planners to inside information about why are we laying off the workers. I think it puts us on council at an extreme level of strain to keep up with all of that, as well as to the members of the city management staff. Now, I know there's no budget. That's clear. How are you going to tack on an extra 5 individual assistants or deputies to us? There's no money there. But I want the city manager to know, and I wasn't ready to go into this rant, but this is really, if anyone disagrees with me, please step forward. It puts staff at an extreme burden. I think it puts you as management in a position where, should I ask this person whom the councilman just met with what they talked about? It puts that person under stress. It puts council members at a disadvantage as to how much do you want to go forward with an issue that you don't necessarily want management to be involved with at any particular point. When I did the Safe Streets Initiative, let me tell you, when I did my Safe Streets Initiative, this was before your time, it was about 3 years ago, I had to recruit my son because I didn't feel any one particular staff member would feel confident in helping me develop that program and that presentation. If I went to transportation staff, they're going to say, hey, a councilman's presenting something about transportation. This might not make you look good if you get it up there and, how comes transportation staff didn't know about this? I didn't want the city manager to know about it because he would have put the kibosh on that very quickly. So this is something we need to deal with. I think we need to raise it at the budget discussion, because clearly the bottom line is there's no budget for this. But I think it's an issue that needs to be discussed at some point. So that's how I feel.
The bottom line is there is no budget. But
That's the bottom line.
Well, you led into it, Mr. Najarian. I've served here longer than anybody up here. When I was elected in 97, I worked full-time for the Corps of Engineers in downtown Los Angeles. I worked a 10-hour, 4-day week so I could have Tuesdays off to be at City Council. I got elected. I said, where's my computer? Laptop. Oh, we don't have any. I said, well, I need one. I use one at work. Write all my own correspondence. Well, how much would it cost? So I went out and cost a laptop, a printer, computer, about $5,000 for elementary. I says, well, we'll have to ask your colleagues. That's okay. They said no. But if I could find a used computer, I could. Came at about $3,000 and they let me have it. That was the beginning of computers. I think the mayor had some little tiny computer from the past. I would come in on Tuesday and there would be some yellow little sheets on my desk. Maybe one, maybe two. Somebody called and wanted a phone call back. That was it. As you said today with the BlackBerry, we can get 50, 70 calls every single day through the BlackBerries wanting us. Or we get emails to the BlackBerry, same thing. So we've totally changed the process. City puts much more demands on the staff because there's so many requests that we pass on to the city manager or on to staff to respond to. That is unaccountable for, but it's a necessary evil that we all face today in the computer age. Just the way it is.
Okay, you've heard the opinions.
Mr. Elliott?
Okay, moving on to management services and their fund summary. Budgeted within two different funds, obviously majority of it in the general fund and the cable access fund. Just a note on the cable access fund, we created the existing structure now through the Public Financing Authority, where the PEG fees go into the cable access fund, and then the cable access fund turns around and leases the studio equipment back to the general fund. So it's a structure where that lease money comes back to the general fund to fund the GTV6 staff and the other capital requirements that the PEG funds are dedicated to. The decrease from this year to 12-13 is when we had the Public Financing Authority take over the structure in Fund 280, there was some residual fund balance. We moved that to Fund 401, the CIP fund, and that needs to be spent on studio equipment for GTV6 purposes. So we moved that out, which is why there's a large discrepancy from one year to the next. Salary and benefits within management services, $3.5 million. Again, all of that in the general fund. M&O is $1.2 million in the general fund. This is the lease payment from the cable access fund to the general fund through that structure. As you see, the $4.7 million total appropriation in management services against in Fund 280, the cable access fund, about $630,000 estimated for the PEG fees this upcoming year, against the lease payment of $541,000. So there'll be some residual fund balance.
So again, there you see the way that the department breaks out. Council, 3 executives, myself, the assistant city manager, internal auditor, the 2 mid-managers, the assistant 2, and our events coordinator. Is that right? I'm sorry, the investigator. Events coordinator is here and technical professional. My mistake.
Do you count council members as management?
We have them as a separate category as council members, elected official.
For benefit purposes.
When you do the percentage and stuff, we're not part of management.
No, I wouldn't. You're your own percentage there.
You really don't manage it.
No, in the council
sit here, we
manager
make
form of
decisions.
government.
Policy.
You make policy. We execute that policy on your behalf. I mean, that's the very nature of council manager.
The previous slide, are the PEG fees secure? There's that litigation that's going on about that. Is that something we can rely on and budget on?
Currently, we can, and it is subject to the litigation, which Charter is challenging the use of those PEG fees, so we're waiting for that.
And they want a payback, too, do they not?
But the court ruled they're not entitled to that already.
They're
So
not
that part of
entitled.
the litigation's been settled.
Okay, so...
The only 2 goals I didn't mention earlier, actually, we did reference the department accountability policy. I gave you an overview of what generally that is. We'll be bringing that back to council in short order and as in the next fiscal year. And then establishing a benchmark for internal audits closeouts 12 months after completing the audit work. We're looking at $400,000 in cuts. At this point, let us take you back to police. We'll go through that. That should put us just in time to finish up by noon, and we can come back for a very brief session after lunch if that's the council's pleasure. We do, as I said earlier, have a couple of closeout items or update items for you.
Tell me what slide police is this time.
101 or 102?
So after lunch, 3 till 3, or we have another session?
After lunch, we'd like you to come back to follow up on fees, the application of those fees, what it looks like, Mr. Zern's discussion on CIP, the discussion on GYA, council comments, public input, and then your...
So basically, we're free.
Then closed session.
Closed session.
And then we have closed session after the 3 o'clock.
So police, real quickly on the dashboard, 75.5 million, 359 employees. In terms of goals, biggest thing that just jumps out to us is maintaining our rankings as an indication of the safety of the community. That is a very big seal of approval that we are quite proud of, getting the DNA lab up and running.
Are we still, now that we're no longer, are we still considered a large city?
Over 100,000, yes.
So we're still in that.
Our rankings changed by nothing that we did, just the change of the
Yeah,
population.
that's what I mean. So, but we're still in one of the top 10 cities of its
Top
size.
20, I believe, Chief, isn't that right? Or number 20?
I just want to be sure if I'm out there quoting
Exactly.
something that
Councilmember Friedman, what changed was our population dropped under 200,000, which took us out of that evaluation category. So the categories we're measured against now is those cities over 100,000, both at the state and national level. At the state level, we're still in the top 10. We're number 8. Nationally, we're ranked number 15, so we're in the top 20 there.
Number 15 in the whole country.
That's correct.
Which is pretty darn impressive.
That is.
It is. The indicators are pretty straightforward in terms of measuring crime, calls for service, response times on call for service, and arrests, complaints, things like that. We'll run you through the financials very quickly and then take any questions council might have.
Police Department has the majority of their budget, obviously, in the general fund. As you can see, the year-by-year comparison with a reduction of about $385,000 from 11-12 to 12-13. They also have a number of special revenue funds going through the list. The Narcotic Asset Forfeiture Fund, funds from when they seize assets and either used or sold, and those items go into that fund. Special grant fund, any other grants that they get, Homeland Security and so on and so forth are run through that. Supplemental law enforcement, another grant fund. Special events fund, that's primarily for filming details where the police provide services for the different film shoots on location. And the joint helicopter, that's our joint operations with the City of Burbank to manage the 3 helicopters. We do the accounting and budgeting for it. Obviously, Burbank budgets their piece, but we take care of the maintenance and pay the bills and so on and so forth through our police department. Grand total budget of about $75.5 million. Broken down with salary and benefits, again, the majority of that being in the general fund of about $58 million. Within the narcotic forfeiture fund, about $445,000. Special grant funds, $897, and these the special revenue funds depend on the activities of which we have and receive grants for.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Mayor? I don't know if there's a place where this is in the presentation, but my question is, with realignment, is our jail going to be used a lot more now, and how does that impact the budget if that's the case? If not, why not, since the whole thing is to move prisoners and sort of shift them around to different jails?
Councilmember Friedman, that is a good question, and that is a concept that's being considered statewide, is if municipal jails might be used to incarcerate those that fall under realignment. The issue is we operate a Type 1 jail facility, and for any sustained incarceration, there are certain requirements that would have to be implemented, such as bringing in medical care and creating an exercise facility. Those types of things would have to occur to house long-term sentence prisoners. So it's not completely unfeasible, but might be sometime in the future before we could look at something like that.
So given that the county jails are taking some of those prisoners in, doesn't that kind of bump the short-term people down the road? I mean, what rather than looking at the long-term prisoners, what about picking up the slack from the short-term prisoners?
And that is a good observation, and is exactly what is happening, is as realignment replaces the county population, those are moved out into alternative sentence, and even though they would still require the same type of medical facilities and exercise facilities that any facility that would house sentenced prisoners, a lot of those are actually being displaced out of jail facilities and into alternative sentencing, such as home assignment or working in a fire camp, things of that nature.
So I guess your answer is that no, we haven't had an uptick in inmates because of realignment.
No, we have not, but there may be opportunities in the future to explore that.
Moving to some of the other funds for salary and benefits, special events funds, primarily overtime, again, for the film shoots and other events that occur within the city. The police helicopter operation is primarily M&O, and we'll see that in a second. Within the general fund, the M&O is about $11 million for the police department. Within the asset forfeiture and narcotic forfeiture fund, about $517,000. Special grant funds budgeted at $139,000, and the supplemental law enforcement at about $11,000. Special events funds, minimal M&O, about $40,000. The police building project was asked about earlier about the COPs. This is the amount of debt service we pay or budget for the COPs within a given year, $2.4 million. The joint helicopter operation, again, with the city of Burbank, the M&O is about $1 million, budgeted for 12-13. Rounding up with the fund recap for the police department, the majority, again, of the appropriations in the general fund of about $69 million. Narcotic asset forfeiture, we can't estimate what the revenues are going to be. Generally, they're anywhere between $500 to $1 million, give or take. So we always have some appropriation, since that's a common trend that we do get that funding, so that it's an ebb and flow with the terms of the appropriation and the amounts in that fund. Special grant fund, again, those depend on the grants that we get. We appropriate those and then can go negative depending on the timing of the grant and the reimbursement. Same thing with the supplemental law enforcement as we end the year. Those funds ebb and flow, but typically will end up at zero if there's no grant activity.
Bob, federal law prohibits the estimation of revenue for the
We don't know what it's going to be because it all depends on the activity within the fund in terms of what the seizures are. But typically on a given year, we get about $500,000 to $1 million.
Is it
Chief
only,
may be able to give you a better.
Chief, is it only narcotic related?
The majority
items?
of asset forfeiture relates to narcotics. There have been seizures from other criminal enterprises, but they're far less in terms of frequency. The issue is that obviously our focus can't be on seizing money. Our issue is on enforcing the law, and the money that we can seize through asset forfeiture is just a bonus. So we don't focus on that. We can't estimate that. That's not part of the protocol. However, there is a history that indicates that our production has been fairly consistent over the last decade.
We've had a few high-profile cases, arrests, and
yes, we have.
You know, the identity fraud and what were the most recent ones up in a couple of homes were raided up in Emerald Isle and those areas. It was that national crime ring. Now, to the extent, I guess the DA is the one that argues that the homes or the Bentleys or the vehicles that were seized were the fruit of the illegal activity. Those are also recoverable, are they not?
They certainly can be, Councilmember Najarian. They can be seized under either federal asset forfeiture laws or state. But obviously the burden of proof is that those items were used in the criminal enterprise or a product of that criminal enterprise. So that has to be demonstrated in court. There has to be evidence of that fact, and then we can make certain seizures. We have made seizures related to certain organized crime elements that have been operating locally in the recent years.
We used to be the hotbed for Colombian cocaine distribution. I know you were obviously on the force when I was with the DA's office in '83 here in Glendale. It was a very lucrative, I mean, they were focused, they were centered here in Glendale with their drop houses and safe houses and all that, and I think we put them out of town. But at that point, I was running motions to the Superior Court for the forfeiture of these assets and those sort of things.
And that is correct, and that practice continues today, because as one criminal enterprise leaves, another one fills the void, certainly. So there's always opportunities to look at asset forfeiture from these criminal enterprises. Interesting that the way the nature of the business is changing now is we encounter less bulk cash. Before, it'd be very common to serve a search warrant and recover, actually millions of dollars in cash. And now so much is done through wire transfer and using technology that you encounter that less and less. So there's more of an investigative effort to identify those funds and make those seizures.
Now, in juxtaposition to that, Councilmember Friedman was telling me what a trivial amount we receive on citations, citation fees and penalties. And
that's correct. It's a small percentage that comes back to the city. Most comes back to the state and the county for court operations and administrative processing.
Well, people think, everyone says that, oh, you're writing tickets because you need to fill your coffers. It is not a
heck of a lot of
tickets. By no means. It's not a money-making enterprise for the city by taking an officer off for,
Yes, that and when you're looking at moving citations, that is absolutely the case. It's but a small percentage of the revenue that is generated that comes back to the city, and it certainly does not cover the cost of enforcement, not even close.
On the credit card fraud, the organized crime rings, I assume any seizure of cars and homes and so forth goes by jurisdiction. If they happen to be living in Glendale and they're convicted and so forth, and we would proportionally take whatever was seized here in this jurisdiction?
Yeah, and that is correct. That is part of the formula, Mr. Mayor, but also it's shared typically between the investigative agencies that participate in the case, and it's prorated based on the amount of resources and efforts put in by each agency.
And who does that? Is it the city attorney's office that pursues the...
In most cases, we will have either a DA, a district attorney, if it's a state level seizure. If it's federal, we'll have an ASUA, and they will work with us. And of course, we have our own in-house counsel from the city attorney's office
That's what I mean,
works
in
with that
terms
as
of
well.
actually negotiating, if you want to call it that, with the federal government or with the local DA. I mean, we obviously have someone here on staff that
Yes, we do.
tries to get the most.
Absolutely.
Okay, to sum up the second page of the fund recap, continuing on with the special events fund, obviously the revenues matches the appropriation in providing those primarily, again, filming shoots and other special events. So there is a little residual fund balance in that fund. Police building fund, the $400,000 revenue is primarily interest income against the debt service payment. We still have a roughly $33 million in cash in that fund to help pay for the debt service for that building.
What is the balance of the debt?
The debt we still owe, I believe it's 51 or 52 million. Against this, and recall we did take $5 million out of this fund. That was part of that $8 or $9 million that we put in the insurance fund. 5 of that came from this fund.
Oh,
insurance.
no, actually. I thought this fund was a restricted fund.
That's our own more or less hedge fund against the debt.
Don't use that term, please.
Internally speaking. Joint helicopter operation, again, that's revenue. Those are...
Are we planning on putting that money back in this fund? Because the calculations, when the initial calculations were made to pay for the police building...
That we would live off the insurance, or the interest.
Right.
We have no plans at this point.
Well, at this point, how are we going to pay the remaining balance of the police building? If it continues like this, we will end up.
That will be a problem eventually. This amount will whittle down as we make the debt service
Right.
because the interest earnings isn't enough to keep up with the debt service.
Right. So what are our plans to pay them?
Waiting and looking to see if there is a way to basically amortize that cost as a fixed cost going forward.
What we should do is we should keep this in mind, and as the economy gets better, before we start doling out cash to everybody, let's replenish this fund.
No disagreement here. Again, the last fund within the police department is the Joint Helicopter Operation and Internal Service Fund to operate the 3 helicopters that we jointly own with the City of Burbank. Appropriation and the revenues coming into the fund, we still have a decent fund balance of about $4 million.
So again, here you see a very standard type of ratio for a police department, a heavy field presence. That's where you see the bulk of their people, very streamlined in terms of span of control. We are endeavoring, as has been discussed already because of the realignment efforts, we are endeavoring to keep the police department as absolutely whole as possible through the coming fiscal year. In terms of their strategic goals, I mentioned the first couple already. The third one, we are very big into technology, predictive policing, as the chief has termed it, and we've been very effective doing that. So the idea here is to do a white paper that looks further at those best practices and applying technology and figuring out where we have weaknesses and how to shore those weaknesses up. So again, working smarter, not harder. We again talk about risk management and reducing costs year over year. And to the extent that we can, implementing those regional law enforcement endeavors that we had identified previously, easier said than done, but I think Glendale, more so than either Burbank or Pasadena, is uniquely situated just by our geographic location to be the hub of some of these actions, be it K-9, be it SWAT, regionalizing those efforts. It's just a matter of getting the other 2 agencies to move forward with us. And again, the same type of situation we saw in the fire department, wherein we want to further diversify the employee base to the extent that law allows and that funding is available to bring on new positions. What you see here in terms of fund reductions, as I say, we want to keep our public safety functions as in a hold harmless type of situation. However, recognizing that we do have a significant gap, the chief is indicating where we might be able to find some savings, but understand these savings are effectively bodies. They are are funded but not yet filled positions. Our goal would be to actually put these several positions back into the line and fill those spots. But if Bob, and we'll close out on the last slide here before we go to lunch, and if council wants to make comments or have public comment before lunch or do it after lunch, it's entirely up to you, but we'll wrap up the formal part of our presentation. We get to slide number 184. It gives you a summation as to where we are. Again, the theme here is that the world is an imperfect place and uncertainty abounds based on where we are at this point in time. We have anticipated resources, anticipated expenditures resulting in a $15.4 million gap. What we see here in terms of those retirement incentives, these are folks that have told us, yes, affirmatively, that they are intending to retire. These numbers here, these 3 numbers are related to one another. To the extent that the 1.7 goes up, these numbers, which there's overlap between these 2, these numbers go down. To the extent that we are able to secure a very significant number of retirements, we obviously can reduce the number of layoffs, but what I want to leave you with is that these 2 numbers, as I say, there's overlap between the 7.7 and the 5.8, because again, with very few exceptions, with small exceptions, when we talk about programs, it's the people that actually operate those programs. The M&O budgets have been cut dramatically. We believe that this number is on an upward trajectory right now. As I mentioned yesterday, we have the interest period that is ongoing. We will come back to council for your consideration a contract with PARS. We are trying to ascertain with confidence how many people will accept the incentive. And then the residual would be here in layoff or as was discussed previously, if council wants to consider other alternatives to making those cuts. But that, at this point, wraps up our presentation.
I want to thank staff for part two of a very, part two or part three?
This is part 4.
Part 4 of a very comprehensive summary, and my colleagues for their questions, and the public for their involvement. And I had a comment about the conversation that we had a little earlier about stretching out some of those fund replenishment obligations, like the workers' compensation fund, and stretching them out a few years to reduce the possibility, to reduce the amount of layoffs that we would need to do. And I just want to say that while I'm open to that, and I definitely am open to that, I think that having that discussion for me right now is premature, because what's most important to me is to be sure that we have the right amount of staff for the job we need to do and no more. So if we feel that we can do more with less, to me that's the primary goal. If we feel that we're cutting into staff where the public's going to suffer, that's when I would be open to having that discussion about stretching out some of those fund obligations and using some of that money to retain staff. But to me the primary question is, how many people do we actually need, and are we there? That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay. We're at almost 15 to 12. I have 4 speakers.
Do it before lunch.
Yeah. Do the speakers want to speak now, or do you want to speak at the end of the session? All right. Well, they'll all speak now then. All right. I'll start with Aram Kazazian, followed by Richard Espiritu.
Each speaker will have 4 minutes.
Aram Kazazian. I have one thing to say from yesterday. I made a comment regarding the stairs we talked about where also Mrs. Friedman had a problem. I was talking to Hassan Haghani today, and he said that's a council ruling. It's not his ruling that you can only replace half the stairs. You cannot change if you have a termite damaged set of stairs with stairs, you can only replace half of it. The council policy, as I understand, due to the fact that if the stairs is built on the side of a building, on a 2-story building, it's in the setback line, on the side yard line. It's not a planning department policy. So maybe we should look into that to change that policy. Council should change it so people should not have a problem with that, because if they can't do anything about it, there's nothing they can do about it. If not, they have to comply to the new code. New code doesn't allow a set of stairs on the side of any property, even if the property is built in the 20s. It doesn't matter when it was built. So that's one thing. Otherwise, I don't have much more to say other than that. Thank you for Rafi for asking a lot of the questions. It was very informative to me. I learned a lot from it. I wish I could sit down someday. You can give me a class on it, on finances. I'll be very glad to have, but you can't do it. So thank you very much.
Richard Espiritu, followed by Mike Mohill.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I am Richard Espiritu. On page 61 of this report, it talks about assisting community development by transferring it over to the city attorney's office. For some reason, I'm very opposed to that concept. Madam Freeman, you were talking about the police department and what was going to happen if they could get more individuals transferred over to our jail. A number of years ago, and I think it is still in effect, an organization known as Homeland Security has a contract with the city of Glendale, and we had over 4,000 inmates being transferred over to the city of Glendale jail. They were getting paid some $60 per day. This is a type 1 prison, jail, and due to the fact that these people are either waiting to go in front of a magistrate or get sent back to their country of origin, we don't have to have medical service and or rest recreational areas. So that's one of the things that maybe the city police department and the city attorney or whoever should contact the Department of Homeland Security to reestablish that relationship with the Homeland Security. I know the LA County sheriffs have been gobbling all that up, and that's basically because of Mr. Baca. I want to think outside of the box for a minute. We've been talking about cuts, we've been talking about finance and everything else, possibly laying off employees. One of the things that I'd like people to think about is another way of generating some income. Unfortunately, it's a two-edged sword because you might wind up having to have another bargaining unit, namely the Teamsters. We give to MV Transportation roughly slightly over $4 million a year for the administration, maintenance. The city of Glendale has its own maintenance department. Not only that, we have individuals within the Department of Public Works and Transportation who have more than enough experience in past work to be able to help operate MV Transportation or actually do the beeline administration. The one thing is there's about 60 bus drivers, and those 60 bus drivers don't make anywhere close to the average what our employees are making here in the city of Glendale. Their starting salary is minimum wage. Top salary is about $35 an hour. We've got the mechanics, we've got everything. You'd also have to probably hire 5 washers and fuelers, but that would be a minimum cost to the city. But we would save nearly $4 million. Thank you.
Mike Mohill, followed by Herbert Milano.
Good morning, Mayor Quintero, council members, and the viewing audience. Salary is a big concern to me right now. We thought about day workers. You know, you go over to Home Depot, and the workers there, my experience is they'll work just a little bit above minimum wage. When you pay them, there's no insurance, there's no medical, there's no dental, there's no pension plan. How come we don't hire them? Why must we have union employees? That's a luxury. Union employees was great when cities were rich with lots of money, but we're poor. Can we, somewhere in the budget, say, hey, this is for outsourcing for day workers? We can save thousands of dollars. Thank you. My name is Mike Mohill.
Herbert Milano.
Mayor Quintero, members of the City Council, and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I believe that when you have a city budget that has pretty much doubled in the last 12 years or so, that the numbers are so significant that looking at some of the numbers below $5 million are almost insignificant in a major discussion of long-term policy. I believe that it's in long-term policy where the major failure has been. When the city decided to make the patient changes in 2001, what we didn't have at the time was a honest evaluation of what would occur on a very long-term basis, 10 years out, 12 years out, 20 years out, given the policy changes in the proposal of 2001. That pension change was based primarily on the information given to you by CalPERS and on the evaluation of the stock market bubble. And everyone knows that the economy during a 10-year period of time, improves and you will have its setbacks and downturns. So making a policy change based on the upper end of the stock market bubble obviously was going to have a significant impact when the economy would have a downturn, and we had a couple of downturns in 2002 and again in 2008. So I think that pension reform is one of the major things that need to be addressed in one way or the other. The other part of the problem of pension that occurred in 2001 and again in 2005 is that the 2001 pension was retroactive to 1971. So basically you took on all these employees that for 30 years have been working for the city of Glendale in the safety area and basically became beneficiaries of that significant pension change. Now, I could argue that Glendale was probably one of the first cities in California to move there. So the argument that they would have gone someplace else doesn't stand. I have the data here with me. I can give it to you. My issue is that pension reform, benefit reform, and the way we handle hourly to permanent employees are where the major problems are. For example, in planning, whenever you have a situation where the amount of activity depends on the state of the economy. When there's an economic downturn, there's less building taking place, there are fewer permits taking place. And so you figure that you need a base number of permanent employees and then an hourly number of employees to take up the changes within the economy. But during the past 10 years, you basically did away with the hourly employees, made them permanent, and now you locked yourself into a significantly higher permanent employee situation. And you have no flexibility now when you have an economic downturn. We have long-term significant quality of life trends that needed to be addressed. They are not addressed. And you have long-term financial impacts that oftentimes are not being addressed by not getting all of these year-to-year comparative evaluations. I believe that many of the discussions that you've had today, for example, with the police with regard to performance and special issues, that those are more appropriate to have if you were to have monthly evaluations of different departments that they come before you, and then you can discuss those short-term issues and trends that they have. I'm not belittling the effort or the risk involved in fire or police. I'm just telling you that without looking at the long-term impact and long-term changes that have occurred in those areas, pensions, benefits, and hourly employees, you won't be able to tackle the macro numbers that you're dealing with. And it is my hope that you get to address those, because I think that the employee have benefited significantly when you add all the benefits in the past 10 years, and I think that's where the give has to come. Thank you very much.
Okay, any comments?
Well, as I said last time, I'm pleased with how the process is going. I'm pleased to see the KPI, the key performance indicators, for each department at this point. I think that is it's a great start. I would like to have if they're going to be looked at on a quarterly basis, I would like to have a copy of all the performance indicators. I would like to have a copy, since this was just a summary as what was presented on the dashboards. I would like to have a more comprehensive list of the key performance indicators for each department. In terms, since this is not the end of the budget and we're not discussing the resolutions as to how we're gonna close the $15 million gap, I will reserve my comments regarding that. However, I would like to ask you take into consideration the comments I made regarding some of the funds. I think it is important to look at these funds and assess them in a proper way, where we can replenish some of the funds that are necessary, and the rest keep it in the respective funds, so that we can meet our obligations as a city. So thank you for the staff. I want to thank everyone who spoke as well.
Just briefly, I know we've got more ahead of us. I would agree with a review, perhaps department by department, of the key performance indicators. I know I spoke about the vacancy issue, and I'm sure if we look at each one of those, we can maybe help fine-tune the performance indicators. The other issue is I would like to have in any one year, we've got those projected budgets differing quite significantly from the actual budget amount, whether there's cost savings or cost overruns. So I'd like those to come to council so we're aware of them For instance, if we have gone through our liability budget in month 9, or if our revenues are greater than anticipated in month 10, I'd like that to come to council. So to the extent that we can reassign or perhaps adjust the good or the bad, the surplus or deficit of funds immediately, as opposed to just sitting down every year looking at it in the broad sense, so we can see what went right, what went wrong. Is there extra money we could reapportion to this fund, pay this loan off faster, or give it to, A to Z that we all hear from constituents about. So some sort of flag system or tickler system to let us know what's going on a more frequent basis rather than on a yearly end-of-year basis.
We can certainly do that. Just to explain a little bit more on the methodology of internal service funds, we actually do that to take the shortages or overages into account each year that we go through and compute the rates that we charge out. You typically do it on an annual basis because it's a tremendous amount of work to go through all the data and come up with a rate and then put it into everybody's budget. So to do that quarterly or even semi-annually would be a lot of additional work to net really the same result, because at the end of each year we reevaluate, did the fund have unexpected reductions in costs. If that's the case, then we can take that into account and lower the rate that we charge out to the departments in the upcoming budget year. So we do accomplish that. It's only on an annual basis. We can certainly bring those the internal service fund numbers back. We typically don't through our quarterly budgets, but we can certainly show what those are through a given year and give you more information during the quarterly process.
No, but I think quarterly is too short a snapshot. We're talking 90 days. To me, 6 months is a more accurate barometer, I think.
The point's well taken. You may get a distortion on either a monthly or even quarterly basis, but we can at least report the information to you, and then what council wants to do with it, surely we can go from there. So again, before all else, you are forewarned with information.
If Mr. Nigerian is done.
I'm done.
Last budget process, I talked quite a bit about frozen positions, and I know that we're looking at cutting everything out. I would hope that we don't have any more frozen positions that have been there for 6 months to a year, and we're trying to preserve those positions.
Those have been eliminated as part of that 15.4. The only ones that are still there, well, the frozen
are the
are
ones
gone.
that should be expected to be filled in the near future.
They thus are not
We are
frozen.
necessary.
We have done that.
Is 12:05. We will recess. When would you like to start, Mr. City Manager?
And we, if we can come back at 1 o'clock, we have, as I say, 3 items to revisit, very briefly, maybe 20 minutes each, and thus we can do closed session at 2 o'clock and jump into the 3 o'clock meeting, and then you're free till 6.
All right. We will recess and reconvene at 1 p.m.
Mics are live. You guys are back. Mayor? And I was on.
Ron?
Dog. Or anyway, I said, let you guys figure it out. Almira.
Okay, we will reconvene the budget study session of May 15th. Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. We have just a few very brief items before we adjourn this budget study session and then go on with the regular business of the city. But first and foremost, we want to alert you to a change in the schedule of performance that we had outlined, I think it was yesterday. We had been focused on a June 5th, June 12th a hearing and adoption schedule, with June 19th being an outside date at this point. Given some of the changes that we're trying to make in the budget, we will likely focus on a June 5th, June 12th budget hearing date, and then have enough time to incorporate whatever changes council wants to have inputted into the budget, and we would come back to you on June 26th for the actual budget adoption. So that leaves us a little bit of time between the start of the fiscal year and the adoption of the budget, but generally speaking, the real meat of the issue is at the budget hearing, which we are pegging for June 12th at this time. With that said, we will then jump really quickly into three different presentations that stem from council questions that have arisen over the course of these study sessions. Up first with a discussion on capital improvement program is Mr. Zerner. Steve?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, when Mr. Elliott gave his presentation a couple weeks ago regarding capital improvement, there was one particular question from Mr. Mnuchin, a very good question, about primarily, and I'm paraphrasing Mr. Mnuchin, if I misquote you, please correct me, but the question was essentially, do we go through some level of process to evaluate CIP projects each year or some basis, to reprogram and to prioritize them on an almost continuous basis? The short answer is yes, we do it. We do it on an annual basis. These, and I've used essentially the same slides Mr. Elliott had given you with a couple of exceptions, but these are the funding sources for public works CIP projects. And with the exception of the one right in the middle, capital improvement, all of these are restricted funds. So they can only be used for certain types of projects. Obviously, you're familiar with the parking, sewer, refuse, and gas tax as well, which was restricted to road money. Prop A local return is the transit fund. Measure R is also, it includes, as I mentioned yesterday, both roads and transit. Special grant is just that. It's a particular grant we may go after, federal or state. Safe Route to School is one, for example, that has restricted usage, very restricted usage in most cases. Transit utility is very closely related to the Prop A local return, again restricted to transit and transit-related uses. Oh. So again, using the slides that Mr. Elliott had provided, these are a breakdown of the projects that we currently have in these various, not all of them, but ones that we had originally proposed some level of change to. In the special grant fund, we have, this is again part of the Safe Route to Schools, is the traffic safety education program for seniors. We have a remaining budget of $53,000, which we have programmed to complete at the end, by the end of this year, early part of next fiscal year. The Verdugo Road traffic signal project, which has a very small amount. Notice of completion is going out on that within the month, so that will be completed by the end of the year. Those then come off the books. We will take them off. But because they are not quite completed, they still show up. Measure R fund for that's actually the Riverdale project. It's actually part of the River Walk project. This is the one Measure R capital project that we have an active or a approved MOU with Metro on, and this is to build a bridge over the culvert. This is a project that you had approved several weeks ago as part of the greater Riverwalk development project. Prop A local return and the transit utility fund you see there. We keep a certain amount of money in that fund for bus stop development and bus bench development as we get requests. As you know, we have an agreement with a private firm to provide about 75 bus shelters, which has worked out fairly well for us. We're considering expanding that. We also have custom bus shelters along Brand, Glen Oaks, San Fernando Road. So this also helps with replacement and repair of those. We've got the bus maintenance facility, and it's really the bus maintenance facility. The natural gas facility has already been completed on the site of the Glendale Transportation Center. This is the funding that we have set aside for the eventual construction of a bus maintenance facility in that same area of the Glendale Transportation Center. There are some issues we need to work out here. Design, costs, We need to see exactly, we need to right-size this facility. That's my greatest concern. So we're working on that right now. And then we also have the Universal Fare System project. This has come up before in front of council, but this is the fare box system that matches other muni operators in the area. It's a system that can take all types of payment. It's a system that transfers very well from one system to the other. If you have a bus pass on one system that's accepted on another, you can use it. Our fare box system is very antiquated, so this is our opportunity to replace that. And this was part of a grant funding effort as well. Then this is the one fund that we have, as I said, that's not restricted to a particular operation fund or grant. And it's, Mr. Elliott's gone through this in detail. There's very little left in this fund, as you can tell. There was a point in time, probably 3 to 4 years ago, when we used to put somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $3 million in this fund for streets and roads, but over time we've had to reduce that. So what we have left in here, we keep a small amount for ADA facility modifications to our own facilities. We have a signal. We have a battery backup system for about 90 of our signals. This is an effort to expand that further. And what this is when we have a power outage, the signals continue to operate for safety purposes. And then the Gladys Drive slope repair project has been completed, and that will be closed out. This didn't show up very well, but now these top two projects here in red, those are done. And since the last time I was here, and Mr. Elliott was explaining this as well, we've closed those two projects out. An example of the process, Mr. Mnuchin, that we go through each year, closing those that are done, reprogramming some, deferring others. And then you'll see what is really the heart and soul of our proposed 012-13 gas tax projects, which is street resurfacing, gutter, and street reconstruction. Those are very generic in their title. Each year we program in based the streets that we do based on the pavement management system quality index condition. So, and I had mentioned yesterday that with the sewer fund, based on a question Mr. Najarian had, that I generally like to keep those projects for no more than 3 years. In the road construction, no more than 18 months. That's generally a full project. So we do the project, we complete it, we close out what we need to close out, and we then bring in the new batch of streets. 18 months, it generally takes us from design to construction. We like to construct during the warm season, so that's starting now through the end of the fall, and to escape the rainy season as well. So and you'll see a future slide I have here that just shows the number of projects that you've all approved just within the last couple months.
Steve, does that include all prep work for the resurfacing? Any substructure, gutters, sidewalks? Is that included in that, or is it separate?
Mr. Weaver, this includes gutter and curb, not sidewalks. Sidewalks is in the maintenance and operation of our general fund budget.
Separate contract then?
We put them together. We often put them together, but they have two separate funding sources.
Like Central, all your subsurface, utilities, everything have been put in now.
Right, that came out of the sewer fund.
Sewer fund. That follows on with the resurfacing if we have the money.
That's correct.
Separate contract, but it's only resurfacing.
That has curb and gutter and some sidewalk work as well. Not new sidewalk, but what we call replacement sidewalk for damaged portions.
And that's in the street contract?
That would be in the contract that if we are...
If we have the money.
If we had the money.
It'd be in the street.
It'd be all be in the same contract. The only separation would be the sewer part of the work.
Gotcha.
And any other subsurface utility that's required.
Storm drains.
Or water and electric lines. The rest of the projects you see on this list are finishing up. The street name sign project is the replacement of all street name signs in the city. So we're about 80% done with that. The rest of the projects you see there are simply matches for grants. It's actually a single grant. Based on the description, we had to break it down into sections, and then that's our grant, or that's our match portion of the grant. The total grant is nearly $4 million.
Question again.
Yes.
Synchronization.
Yes.
So that means you can control it in-house, so you don't go one block stop, one block stop. Synchronization means theoretically, if you're going at the posted speed limit, you should have a pretty clear-cut.
Correct, Mr. Weaver. That's the idea. Is you set the signals for a certain speed. If that's the case, and it was everything was working well, there wasn't any accidents or folks driving, at very reduced speeds. That should get you through.
Because there's been complaints,
Right.
stopping every block. So we're gradually getting there.
Right. This also allows us to manage from the transport or the traffic control center during emergencies, during special events. We can control the signals from there. We have about 70% of the city under, and this is all through a fiber optic interconnect. The next portion of the project essentially covers all of the northern part of the city, and that should be done within a year. And it's actually further above Glen Oaks, basically from about the college all the way north.
Well, Glen Oaks is done. So
Glen Oaks is done, yes. We have a lot of fiber on Glen Oaks.
everybody there can go 60 miles an hour.
The speed limit, we would hope. Then we transition into the parking fund. Again, I apologize, that's a little hard to read in red. But those two projects, we have closed those. We just have determined that those are no longer necessary, so we'll close those out. In this particular case, the money goes back into the parking fund. At a later date, if we have another CIP project within the parking fund that we need to accomplish, we'll reprogram the money through the budget process and come before the council. The other two projects are ones that we continue to work on, and that's security cameras for 2 of our garages. Then the parking lot meter pay station is a project we're wrapping up. We have a certain maintenance obligation that we're finalizing, and then that we'll be able to close that particular project out as well, probably not until next fiscal year. The final project there, which is a new project, is to retrofit our Civic Center garage here with LED lighting. The lighting in the garage is very poor. Some of you may have noticed we put some test areas in underneath that greatly improve the visibility and the lighting in there. And so we were working with GWP to have the entire garage retrofitted with the LED lighting. Sewer fund, as I mentioned yesterday, we try to keep the projects no longer than 3 years. Sewers are a little different than streets. There's a lot more coordination that goes into it. The sewer is a subsurface utility that is usually the very deepest, which means everything else is on top of it. So oftentimes it may require both the electric and water departments to move something, us to move a storm drain, telephone, cable, the gas company. All of those may come into play. So those projects take a little longer to develop. And Mr. Weaver noted that what we're doing on Central, that's exactly the way we like to time them as well. Take care of the subsurface work, come back and redo the street. So we coordinate that as well. So these are what the Doran pump station is nearly complete, will be complete by the end of this year. The others are just ongoing maintenance programs, whether it's a reconstruction of our sewer system or a capacity improvement. The next line was a stormwater pollutant treatment project that we had put a placeholder. It's no longer necessary, so we've reduced that tremendously, and that money goes back into the fund. The Arch Place storm drain, I think Mr. Mnuchin actually mentioned that last time. That's actually been approved and out to bid.
So it'll be in before the slurry sealing on Arch.
Yes. And we have the Victory Trucks wastewater capacity improvement project, which we're just closing out. This was a major sewer line increase that essentially was behind the water and power plant. We closed out the emergency sewer and storm drain repair program. We already had sufficient funds in there. San Fernando and Western Storm Drain project has been completed. We still have the Glen Oaks Adams project to go, but that's part of an upcoming
Ms.
project.
Friedman?
I'm sorry.
I know that EPA regulations are giving a lot of cities fits over wastewater treatment. Are we facing any major capital projects to be in compliance, and are we in compliance? Are we going to face any fines, any large expenditures in the future that you can anticipate based on EPA regulations, or are we kind of already there?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, we're very fortunate. Our system is in very, very good condition. We're not like one of our neighbors who's under their second $1 billion consent decree for their sewer system, or places like in Orange County and San Diego County that have let the system go to the point where they are under EPA, either consent decrees or some sort of a penalty to get the system going. We have one of the lowest, what is called sewage overflow, SSO is what it's called. We have one of the lowest ratios of any city in California. In fact, we just won an award for that. So our system is not only in good shape, our capacity, for instance, our under capacity is less than 1%.
We have no problems with the LA River wastewater?
No. Again, there are discharge penalties that could occur if we have a sewer overflow that gets into the storm drain. But our preventative maintenance and our response is very, very good when it comes to that. So I don't anticipate any. I can't say that if something happened tomorrow, but the system is in good shape. Our response plan and maintenance plans are very, very well organized. So I have a lot of confidence that we're good that way.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. These are just some other projects that remain on the books. Again, in the red, the Chevy Chase sewer design, we're closing that out. That the design portion of that has been taken care of. And then we have these two large projects at the end, Circle 7 and the Tyburn Wastewater Capacity Improvement Project. These are projects that we're able to push out. This will probably not be another 3 to 5 years that we'll need. At least the Tyburn Wastewater Capacity, I think we're good for at least 3 years. On Circle 7, we'll continue to watch that, but I just don't think it's a project that we're going to need to undertake right now. And as again, in response to the question Mr. Najarian had yesterday, there's just a capacity issue of how much we can actually do at any one time, whether it's designing it or constructing it. We're also trying to be conscious of tearing too much up at one time. The Glendale Avenue Wastewater Capacity Improvement Project is one we left on. I think, the staff thinks very necessary. This is at the southern part of Glendale Avenue. It does require some coordination with the electrical department, so we're working those details out now. But it will also be part, or it'll be the precursor to us going in and resurfacing Glendale Ave. In the refuse fund paid a portion of the natural gas facility, as all of our refuse trucks and street sweepers are natural gas fueled. So that we're just closing out. The Shoal Canyon landfill expansion, the environmental study, which was approved by council 3 years ago, that continues. We're reaching the point of completion, and then we'll go to the public with that probably by the end of the year. So that's just the recap of the various projects or the funds that we just went over. And you can see again in red are projects that we've reprogrammed or reprioritized or closed.
So stormwater, same condition as wastewater? We're good with regulations, with whatever? Okay.
I believe so. And in fact, we probably put a little bit more money into the stormwater system and the infrastructure over the last 5 years. In Glendale, we have a couple of unique areas where we have a lot of old corrugated metal pipe that's very difficult to try. Some of it runs under homes, to be honest with you. It's very difficult to replace it. But we've made adjustments in trying to pick the waste or the stormwater up ahead of some of these, so that we can properly manage it, convey it.
The reason I asked about the LA River is I was at an ICA meeting, Independent Cities Association meeting, and some of our colleagues, some of our cities that are closer to the ocean that have industrial cores along the LA River are being hit with fines for discharges from their industrial areas going into the river. So I just wanted to be sure that our wastewater is dealing with all of those issues.
Between us and also there's the industrial waste monitoring component of the fire department that actually takes care of those permits and ensures that there is no illicit discharges and those kind of things. I think together we're doing a good job. Under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System in the stormwater management, there's a lot of regulations, some of which are very, very difficult to try to achieve, but we've been working as diligently as we can. I think some of the restrictions, we're trying to work on reasonableness. I mean, I'm sure the Water Board would love zero on everything, zero bacteria, zero metal, zero trash, but how realistic is that? So as cities, we're trying to work with them on a much more workable plan. But it is our intention to clean that water and make sure that our discharges are as clean as they possibly can be. Oh, this is the one slide I added. And this is what you've approved within the last 2 months or so. To give you an idea of that notion that we're right in the middle of the construction season, and I know from past budget processes there's been questions about, well, Steve, you're holding a huge balance in this. Why hasn't there been any movement? Well, up until the construction, small portion, maybe 10%, is design and survey. So as you can see, we're entering what I call the construction season, and this is a lot of work right here that will all be completed by probably October, November of this year. Again, the warm season, avoiding the rain, that's our objective. I think that's it.
Some questions?
Najarian.
I have a couple questions, but let me just start out with some of the more general ones. Steve, how's the trend in bidding on these projects? I know several years ago it was becoming quite more economical. We were seeing 20-25% less than engineer's estimate. Is that still the case, or are we?
Mr. Najarian, we're still seeing favorable bids come in, not to the level we had at first, but for instance, last week I had Brand Library in front of you, which was at 27% below the actual cost estimator's estimate, which is even a little bit more precise than an engineer's estimate. But generally speaking, as you see the projects come in, and I don't know, we used to give a flat engineer's estimate, but as prices fluctuated so much, I began to give a range. And we are beginning to go below even the low range. So it's still very favorable. I'll say somewhere in the probably 7 to 12% range is not unusual for any of our projects. And where we used to take our bids and estimate them based on previous years, we're actually estimating on the most recent, which could be a month ago, and even in what Burbank and Pasadena have gotten in bids. So we're trying to stay as current with labor and materials as we can. So it's still a favorable market, Mr. Najarian.
Okay, that's good. With regard to some of the projects that are related to transit, there's a move to extend the Measure R sales tax, which is a countywide half-cent sales tax, which is actually has a lifespan of about 27 years left. If the voters vote for that, there may be some extra funding available to the different cities in the region. So my thoughts and my advice that I've extended before is let's keep a list of transit projects on the shelf that within a relatively short period of time we can pull down. There may be a short window of opportunity for, let's say, transit centers, bike improvements, electric car refueling. Now that seems to be a new rage that's coming forward. Because by the time we hear about an availability of funding and we get the engineers working on it and develop a project, it may be too late. That window might be closed and others may be ahead of us in line. So to the extent that we can foresee and predict certain areas of funding opening up, I think we should get as much on the board as we can. For instance, we're pushing to, and this is not a new project, but we've been pushing to get a transit line between the Orange Line, Bob Hope Airport, what's it called now? There's another Burbank Bob Hope Airport, Glendale, and the Gold Line in Pasadena. Right. We may need funds for a transit stop something more than just a regular cover over a bus stop. So to the extent we can foresee where that would go, anticipate that line coming and have it ready to go, we could be in the front line as those funds come available. Not to mention the biannual call for projects that Metro puts forth. So the more things we have ready on the shelf, I've seen that the winners oftentimes in these transit the scramble for transit funds, are those cities that have projects ready to go. It seemed like a far-fetched idea to do the mock-up or do some studies on it, but when the funding opens up, they pull it off the shelf and they're first in line, and they oftentimes get funding. So we've talked about that before, and
right.
I know we try and think about these things, but especially in the next 6 months to a year, as that Measure R may be extended and may bring a lot more money to the county for transit, which includes roadways, and it's capital, so it's not operating in M&O. Let's be ready to jump and have the first one in line with our plan to grab some money.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I think we learned a really valuable lesson when the ARRA funds, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act monies, became available, and we had such, the shovel ready was the quote projects, and we were able to get out there ahead of some folks. Now, obviously, that money was allocated based on population, but you could essentially fall behind and lose all of your allocation by not having your projects ready, and we were able to do that. And so, absolutely, a very good point.
I agree with Mr. Najarian, not only Measure R, which I think will probably happen, the extension, but also any federal funds that may be available in the country.
Right.
DOT funds.
Good point.
Else? Okay, thank you very much.
With that, we would bring up CDD Director Hassan Agani to talk very briefly about some of the questions regarding proposed fee increases, CPI fee increases, and then we'll have Jess Duran come up afterwards and talk about GYA. Hassan?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Again, as part of the presentation that we had, I think, 2 weeks ago or last week, Councilman Manukian and another council, I think the mayor, asked to get a profile of the projects and how the fees would be working out in typical projects in Glendale based on the current and the proposed fees for next year. So we have put together this presentation, and to go before I start, we have put together 6 scenarios. These are real scenarios that have happened in Glendale. But before getting into the details of those scenarios, let me just explain what influences costs in review projects. Number one is the applicant's desires. To what extent the designers and builders they understand the regulations, to what extent they're willing to comply with code requirements and guidelines, or they might want to deviate from those, and their ability to meet the conditions that are imposed by the review authorities, whichever review authority that might be. And then the level of community interest and input. That plays a huge role in cost. And then the last one is just a general statement that I think a lot of people do not realize, that generally projects in neighborhoods are much more challenging than large downtown and commercial development projects. The reasons are that the small projects in the neighborhoods are a lot more emotional, both for the applicants and the neighborhoods, and then the level of interaction will be a lot more emotionally charged. Going to the stages of project analysis, these are the stages that we go through with all of the applicants, but in terms of both planning and building and safety processes. We review the code requirements and environmental impacts. We work with the applicants to accommodate their goals. For the most part, we ask them, what is it that you want? Tell us everything you want, and we'll work with you towards achieving that. And that's when we start working with them and making recommendations to them that will make their projects approvable. We'll try to minimize their headaches. And anticipate review authority concerns. And in most cases, that would be the design review authorities, whether it's you or the design review board. That we can anticipate to a great deal what people's concerns are based on the different neighborhoods. We try to give them an anticipation of that and address those concerns that we hear from the neighbors and tell them what they are. Sometimes we encourage them to meet with the neighbors themselves. We even coach them on how to approach the neighbors so that they will get a more favorable result from the neighbors. And Then we have to follow up on project review and alterations by boards and commissions or hearing officers. A lot of times projects get special conditions or considerations at the hearing, and then following up to make sure that they get implemented is a big part of our work, and sometimes the most challenging part of our work afterwards. And then the last piece, which is related but not completely, is follow up on code enforcement cases. On code enforcement cases, a lot of times people need to come to get either planning or building or other permits. And so we work with them towards compliance. And a lot of times that becomes a bigger challenge than a lot of people realize. And I'm not going to get in a lot of detail on that, but that also includes permit fees, a lot of times double fees because people have done work without getting permits ahead of time, and then they need to be penalized. And sometimes that raises some complaints from people. The 6 scenarios we have put together, again, I'm not going to mention where they were, but these are real projects that took place, and we're looking at them both this year's fees and next year's fees. We're starting from the most complex in terms of review to the least complex, one downtown mixed-use project, a commercial new construction outside of downtown, which has a different review authority than the City Council, Hillside CUP DRB new single family, which falls in the middle of complexity in terms of technical complexity, but in terms of interaction with the community and the applicant, it's probably the most complex. DRB single family remodel, and then DRB exempt single family remodel and commercial tenant improvement.
What's a DRB exempt single family?
Well, they're
exempt from design review, basically?
They're exempt from going to the design review board. And this is to show you that there are ways that people can actually minimize the level of, if they choose to. So, for the first project, the downtown mixed-use project, we had to do an analysis of the SB 18 and DSP bonuses and waivers, so people are taking advantage of those. The review of parking impacts and availability, negotiations over unit size, open space, landscaping, building articulation, and ground floor facades. This takes a lot of staff interaction ahead of the project coming before you. And then estimated 500 hours of staff time from community development departments. Sometimes we do concurrent meetings between building and safety and design review staff with the applicants so that they can coordinate some of the work so they're not going a direction that they'll have to change later on. The entitlements for the land use entitlements took about 1 year, and then the building permits took about 10 and a half months on that particular.
In addition to the 1 year, so it took
Correct.
about 2 years to get
groundbreaking? Right, for a downtown mixed-use project. And I must say, in terms of downtown mixed-use projects, we're way ahead of other cities. I don't know what people say, and I hear a lot of those comments.
I don't know what the process
Downtown
is.
LA takes 7 years. On average, 7 years.
Only?
And Burbank and Pasadena, again, despite what people say, take approximately 4 years. To Pasadena may take even longer. In terms of our downtown specific plan area and the San Fernando Road corridor, we have by far the most expedited process compared to any city, and I challenge any city to come up with a better streamlined process in those areas.
Well, we have a bad rap then. I mean,
I think a lot of it is.
I don't think many people realize that we're so
right, and that's
so
what
quick.
key performance indicators will do. Actually, it will benefit the programs that we are excelling in, and point out shortcomings if we have any.
We have been encouraging recently. We didn't do that before. Recently, when we hear compliments from the applicants, we encourage them to contact you, because you may hear from all the others, but you may not be hearing the ones who say.
It's not necessarily.
I have been hearing compliments, particularly in San Fernando Road.
Because they give us compliments like you are the easiest city to work with for these large projects, and we say, I think council and the community ought to hear this. So here are the way that the numbers work. For that downtown mixed-use project, the series on the top are all the planning entitlement processes, and most of the case would be in front of you in this case. So $45,851 for the planning entitlement fees, and the building engineering pass-through fees, and that is a piece that I asked Stuart Tom to actually separate out, because a lot of times people are going to come and tell you that we paid so much in building fees, and that's in fact not accurate. In this case, case, about $1.5 million was paid for all the pass-through fees that the building division simply collects and passes.
What was the total project cost? I mean, things in perspective in terms of fees and stuff.
Oh, this $40 million project, yes. So this gives you both building safety and planning fees for that largest project.
The total is about 5% of fees, overall fees, about 5%.
That's just about, yes. So now, this is again fiscal year 2011-12. If we apply, and by the way, the tech surcharge is embedded in the fees where the tech surcharge is applicable already in our system, so that's included in this.
Can you go back to how much was the total prior one?
This is the current year.
This is the first one?
This is the first one. Okay. So this project, if you apply the fees that we're proposing for next year, including the tech surcharge, will be this, fiscal year 2012. So if, again, I'll go back. This is for planning subtotal is about 46,000. For building is 2.1. Really, the difference is not that much, and that is really... so these are the exact same permits with the proposed new fees would be this much. The next project is a commercial building outside
total about $20,000 difference, 20,
that's about
25?
Right, give or take. For a commercial project outside of downtown, this is a new building of 8,900 square feet. First submission to reuse building with parking in front, return for redesign. This is really an extensive one that had to go to DRB twice. Second submission, demolished and rebuilt at street edge. Estimated staff time of 78 hours. Entitlement 6 months. Again, this one, I would say, I was even surprised by that it only took 6 months. It really did only take 6 months for a 9,000 square foot building, commercial building, despite our design review board process. Yes.
I'm sorry. Can you go back to number one again? The
Yes.
difference was how much money between last year and this year?
This year and next year, the difference would be, so for planning permits from 45
Right, so it's
to 46 would be
2,000.
We have a couple thousand.
3,000. Okay, I heard the number 20,000. I just wanted to be sure.
But if you add building,
right. Okay.
that
Oh, with the building. Okay.
building
So
again,
out-
which also includes
Right. So out of a $41 million budget for the whole project. Okay.
correct. And again, part of that, only 16 building permits are 669.
Thanks. With the flashing
Yeah.
back and forth, I just wanted to be sure I got
Is the
number
park
right.
fee in the pass-through line?
Yes, park fee is in the parks and libraries fees is there. So this one is a new commercial building of that size, as I explained, and building permits took about 10 and a half months. The issues were site planning, treatment of the corner, architectural detailing, street dedication, and parking lot circulation, which includes, obviously, Public Works was involved in 2 of the items, and most of the rest were CDD. This one, the planning entitlement fees were about $12,000, and the building subtotal, which included fire permits and pass-through permits, was $44,000 or $45,000 approximately. You apply next year's fees. Again, let me just go back and forth so you can see. So just slightly on the planning subtotal, and about 1,000, a little bit near 2,000 on the building safety fees. Hillside CUP DRB new single family. This is, as I mentioned, as you've seen in some of the cases that are come before you in appeals, these are the most challenging projects for us, really. And so they require more than just code analysis. That's the very first thing we do. Then extra plans to show driveway slope, height of basement area. As we get more detail, we always have to ask for more information, because those are the information pieces that the review authority will ask us to explain. Regular dialogue, the regular meaning going back and forth a lot with the designer to mitigate neighborhood concerns. Estimated staff time of 120 hours. 1 year entitlement process. As you notice, this takes longer than a downtown project. And building permits, 3.5 months. In this case, a lot of the time spent with staff has to do with the design review process. The case was a modern house in 1970s, split-level suburban ranch area, site planning and massing towards the hillside pool on elevated deck raised concerns about slope stability and privacy intrusion, remodel of basement area with which created a third story, and redesign to remodel a central tower element. So these were the points of negotiation that we had to go through with the applicant. So this one is the third case. It's a new single family that would be $7,000 for the CUP and the DRB case, and building and safety and other pass-through fees would be about $30,000. The same fees applied next year would be slightly more.
It's a few $100 difference, basically.
That's right.
About $400 or $500.
Right. This is a DRB single-family remodel. It's a remodel that is required to go before the Design Review Board. This is probably one of the types of cases that we get most frowns from the applicants, that I'm simply remodeling. Why are you asking me to go before the DRB? Oftentimes, the reason is that they're remodeling to the extent that the building is not recognized from what it was before, and for those cases, we have to go before the DRB.
Who makes that judgment?
We have been... The zoning code makes that judgment, and we are the ones to interpret the code. And just so you know, the rule of thumb is that if a DRB person sees that, will they say, how come it didn't come before us? That's really the basic rule of thumb. Or if a neighbor sees us, will they call us and say, did this go before the DRB and we didn't get a notice?
There's something about the amount of square footage that's added.
There's
to
an amount of
when
square
you're
footage, but the amount of square footage is the first step.
Right.
The second step is any change in the architectural character. That's the part that a lot of times the applicants object, but we do think that if a Cape Cod is being turned into Mediterranean, we have to take it to DRB. That's really where that is. So it's actually only a small addition to the first floor, larger addition to the second floor, 3 staff meetings with project architect, estimated staff time of 44 hours, entitlements 3 months, building permit 10 months. This particular case was a relatively good case because both the applicant and his client were very much willing to work with staff towards getting a DRB approval right from the get-go. And then the issues were only architectural consistency and, compatibility, massing to fit in the neighborhood. The planning subtotal was just a little under $2,000, and the building subtotal was about $13,000 in this case.
Do you know what the total budget was for their project by any chance? About?
I can't guess.
I mean, building onto the second floor, it's not 20,000. It's up there, right? It's
right. Yes, it's up there. Based on the building fees, we can probably reverse the estimate. But I have to tell you, the proportions are a little bit more in these cases than the ones that are starting from the scratch, and that's a little bit of the what goes against one's it's anti-intuitive way of that it works is that if you're adding, sometimes the headaches actually increase. That's just how it works.
because of building codes and that.
Because of the building codes compatibility, they're trying to avoid bringing the building to today's code standards. They're trying to bypass a lot of the new requirements so they don't have to demolish too much to go over the 50%. So it's just a lot of trying to finesse things and making them fit. So for next year, it'll be just a slight addition. The 5 case is a DRB exempt single family remodel. I must say, the previous case, a lot of times we give them an option that if you want to avoid going to the DRB, you could do this. And we tell them ways that they could do that. And a lot of times people don't opt to go that way. But this is an option. So in this case, this particular case was a porch enclosure at front of house and 265 square addition at rear. 3-hour staff time, minor issues of consistency regarding design of entry and architectural style. Entitlements were not necessary because they work to be DRB exempt, and building permits just 3 months.
So even though the front porch faces the street,
in this case there was a way that they could do this without altering the architectural style. Sometimes that causes a DRB review. Good catch, Mr. Mayor. So in this case, you'll see the planning subtotal is only $136. That's the exemption fee, really, that they have to pay, and that is for us to review it to say yes, it's exempt.
What is the limit in terms of square footage that someone can add? Let's say
I believe we are
at the back of their house or in the side without
The last one, the increase we did is 200 square feet, but
It was around 700.
well, no, actually, it is. We did increase it. Well, yeah, it was 500. We increased it to 700. Sorry, thank you. You're correct. So in this case,
So if someone is building around 500-600 square foot in back of their house, they can go through this process?
they could. And oftentimes, this is the first thing we offer them. We say, and we tell them how to get there.
What is the difference between this process and why would they go through the other process if they can go through this one?
They might be changing the building, altering the building so substantially that we think it would have an impact of review. Okay, and then again, the same process with the new fees will be just slightly increased for next year. This is the last profile we're showing you. This is a simple commercial tenant improvement project. For planning, they only need to get a new zoning use certificate, which does require actually a site visit. And then the rest is simply building permits, and you'll see the numbers, and they'll only increase a little bit. And again, so I'll go back and forth so you can see. So I think based on these 6 different types that we showed you, we're showing that the impact of the fees that we're recommending will really not be that significant. I hope that comes across. Any questions?
No, actually, I thank you.
Thank you.
It's surprising how refreshing it is to have all the information and this information presented as you compare it to some of the hearsay that we hear in the community. And if I could get a copy of that
by all means
presentation, I think I would appreciate it. It's certainly a good way of presenting both all the options that are available to the community. And as they deal with some of these issues, we can go back and say, you could do this, and these are the fees, and it's reasonable.
Yes, sir. Yeah, let me say that my experience has been that quite often the people that had problems and were complaining are people that had issues with their project. They weren't flexible or just wanted to do something that wasn't appropriate. And as was mentioned yesterday, sometimes it's the actual building code. It's not our own design standard.
The state building code.
Right,
yeah.
the state building code that they're dealing with, but they sort of juxtapose that on that somehow it's the city. So that was excellent.
Right.
Last up is Mr. Duran talking about GYA, and then we'll wrap this up and be able to go into closed session, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Mayor Quintero, members of the City Council, I'd like to make just a few contextual comments, and then I'll turn over the presentation to Karina Gregorian, who manages all of our GYA programs and serves as the de facto executive director of the GYA board. And under the auspices of the nonprofit board of directors, it's clear that the Glendale Youth Alliance operates a multifaceted at-risk youth employment program utilizing a variety of funding sources to meet its goal of serving as many at-risk youth as possible, and in most cases, assisting youth with their first job and including life skills training that a lot of these youth really need. And of course, the number of youth that we are able to serve is commensurate with the funding levels. Obviously, some years we receive more and are able to raise more funding than in other years. GYA is the only youth employment program of its kind in the city of Glendale, and historically, youth employment has always been a high priority of the city and the city council. We have gotten together with the finance division, and so last night we did reconcile the budget, and so the estimated revenue was reduced to match the projected appropriation. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Karina, and she can walk you through the budget and the various program components. Again, Karina's in charge of running the program on a day-to-day basis and can answer any detailed questions you might have.
Good afternoon, Mayor Quintero, council members. My name is Karina Gregorian. I'm the Community Development Supervisor. Per your request, we have some additional information as far as our budget. So the total GYA budget, I apologize if it's difficult to see. General fund is approximately $236,000, and GYA 211 fund is about $1.8 million. Salaries in the GYA fund are approximately $223,000. Hourly wages, most of which are youth wages, are a little bit over $1 million. Benefits, $269,000, and the M&O is about $300,000, which $200,000 of which is cost allocation, ISD, and fleet charges. Overall, cost allocation through the city, ISD charges, and fleet. Charge the youth. The total budget is a little bit over $2 million. The two GYA 211 funding sources consist of program revenue from the enterprise programs, which is about 65% of our total revenue, a little bit over $1 million. We have grants, $506,000. City departments pitch in to pay for our summer brush program, which is $72,000, and fundraising through the board and staff, approximately $50,000. Some of the grants include WIA, Workforce Investment Act, which is approximately $300,000. LA County usually pays for our summer youth employment program. Last year, we were afraid that the funding wasn't available, and it came through last minute. At this point, it's not confirmed for this year, but we're hoping I'll come through last minute as well. CDBG, $51,000, and United Way, $35,000. Our general fund pays for a portion of our staff salaries and benefits and some minor ISD charges. We really rely on the general fund and some of the grant portions to pay for staff costs and operational expenses. A lot of our funding goes directly to paying for youth wages, so we're usually tight on the operational and staff cost portion of our budget.
For the youth. $169,000.
Some of the youth work almost full-time, so they pay into PERS. There's also liability insurance and other, it's fringe benefits. Or
It's the regular benefit load that we would apply to all the other employees. Well, it's broken out in benefits. That includes unemployment insurance and all that good stuff.
They get help?
No, they don't. But there's approximately 25% of their wages are benefits that we pay. GYA Fund 211 programs. GYA operates 5 programs, serves over 450 youth on an annual basis, 2 of which are revenue-generating programs, which is our GREAT program and our GYP, and I'll go in a little bit more detail in a little bit. 3 are...
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to ask you, just to go back,
Yes.
my brain is moving a little slower than your presentation.
No problem.
So if they're paying into PERS, they're paying into PERS retirement as well? But they're not usually around long enough to vest, right? So what happens to those payments?
But they're not PERS employees. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we handle the payroll for GYA, but it's actually we pay into Social Security for those employees.
Okay, so they're paying into Social Security.
There's actually 2 sets of youth workers. We have the temporary grant employees that are classified as SM3 that pay into Social Security, and we have SM2, which are similar to regular hourly employees of the city.
Okay.
So if they work over 1,000 hours a year, they do.
Correct. Typically, we enroll part-timers in PARS, which is an alternative retirement plan in lieu of Social Security. Once they eclipse the hour limit, then we have to enroll them in PERS. That's PERS rules.
So if they're paying into PERS, or Social Security.
Depends on the employee.
So if they're paying into PERS, but they're not hired long enough to vest into PERS, right? So if they're paying into PERS, what happens to that money they're paying towards PERS retirement if they don't vest?
They can either roll it over into a 401k.
Oh, they can.
Or,
they have the option.
or
Their
cash it out.
contributions are theirs, and they can withdraw it until they hit 5 years.
I mean, clearly my question is just, as I am not a vested PERS employee myself, I just don't know what happens to someone who's paying into PERS who doesn't vest.
The amount of money that the employee contributes to that 8% or 7%, depending on the formula, is put into an account. Until you vest, that's money that can be withdrawn prior to 5 years.
Okay, didn't know that. Thank you.
Sure. We have 3 grant programs that we operate: the Teen Employment and Mentoring Program, which we call TEAM, Employer Incentive Program, EIP, which some of the youth are also co-enrolled in our hospitality program, and the Summer Youth Employment Program.
There's no revenue generated from the summer youth employment?
Not from Summer Youth Program.
Those are the guys that do the brush clearance?
Well, our GYP program does brush clearance as well. Summer Brush works mainly on public hillsides, and they're paid through the $72,000 that's allocated for Summer Brush.
In other words, we're doing the trails up in the mountains for fire department.
Correct. Correct. So the Glendale Resources for Employment and Training, our great program. Youth with a proven work ethic and previous job experience are placed in career exploration jobs. Their wages are paid for the businesses that hire them. Employers are billed twice a month for the hours of the employee has worked. It's similar to an employment agency. We place out the youth, we pay for their wages, and we turn around and bill the employer. The goal of the program is to provide youth opportunities and experience to obtain salary positions within the City of Glendale or outside organizations. Currently, we have 40 youth served through that program, and the youth wages are approximately $900,000 M&O, and the total is a little bit over $1 million. And as I mentioned, some of these youth are working up to 40 hours a week.
And what are the employers paying for them? Is it a flat rate for every employer?
No, it varies based on their the job that they're doing, their responsibilities.
So generally, what kind of range?
It can be anywhere from $8 an hour to up to $15 an hour.
And the reason I'm asking is because for those employers out there who are looking for people, it's a great way to get very low cost, competitive cost employees who are very enthusiastic while you're helping the youth in the community.
Right. Thank you. GYP, youth that succeed in the Summer Brush Clearance Program are eligible to participate in our GYP program, where supervised teams of youth ages 14 to 18 perform hillside brush clearance on private properties for a fee. And currently we have 40 youth in that program as well. Salaries and benefits, $51,000, youth wages, $125,000, M&O, $39,000. Total cost of the program is $215,000. And this is actually where the $51,000 from CDBG goes to pay for the staff salaries, just so we can stay competitive with other companies and be able to get the bids. As is, we have customers complaining that our fees are too high, or they're asking if they can pay in installments because they can't afford it. Any higher, we would run out of the competition. Grant programs. Our TEAM program is designed for youth who are able to work more independently. Participants learn to meet workplace expectations such as being on time, dressing appropriately, and following through on assignments. Funding is provided by Workforce Investment Act in-school youth program. Participants are students who are currently in high school and they're seniors. Currently we have 68 youth in that program. The Employer Incentive Program, EIP, serves older youth ages 18 to 21. Youth are placed primarily in private businesses, and the goal is to get them permanent employment after the training term. The grant does pay for 160 hours of their work as an incentive to the employer to hire our youth. And we partner with LACC to provide hospitality training certification for the youth. And that's funded through Workforce Investment Act and United Way. Currently, we have 48 youth in the program. WIA funds are approximately $300,000. United Way is $35,000. And last but not least is our Summer Youth Employment Program. Participants receive life skills and pre-employment training and paid work experience. The Brush Clearance Program provides the youngest and unskilled youth, ages 14 to 16, first-time job experience. On closely supervised teams, they spent 6 weeks removing overgrown brush to prevent fires on our hillsides. Excuse me. Youth who already possess some basic skills are placed in other community agencies, businesses, so on and so forth. As I mentioned previously, LA County funded this program last year, or the current year. It was $120,000. Fundraising by the board and staff, approximately $50,000. We were able to put 50 youth to work, and it paid directly just for the youth wages. And our summer brush program, $72,000, which allows for 45 youth to do the summer brush clearance. And salaries, benefits, $20,000, youth wages, $209,000, M&O, $13,000, and the total is $242,000 for the program. Yes.
Do you have a waiting list of youth that would like to work?
We do. Some of the grant programs are very specific as far as income levels and residency and so forth. But the summer program, we usually have over 1,000 youth applying. Last summer, we were able to serve 200 youth. At this point, we only have our summer brush program, and we're hoping to raise $50,000. And if other funding becomes available, we're always looking for grant funds and other opportunities.
It's 100 out of 1,000.
Correct.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, sir, that brings us to the end of round 4 of budget study sessions. We anticipate being able to come back to you in the course of regular council agendas on Tuesday afternoons in particular, on the, I believe, the possibly the 29th and the 5th, in anticipation of a June 12th budget hearing. On the 29th, on the 5th is when we would hope to, based on feedback that we've gotten from council, based on feedback that we're getting from potential retirees, be able to present you with what those trade-offs will be for the coming budget year. And again, the more incentives takers that we get for the retirement incentive, the fewer layoffs we'll have, and vice versa. So at this point, if there's any additional comments or questions from the council, if not, we can move to closed session.
I hear none, so let's have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. We are adjourned. We'll